Happy Insurrection Day, everyone! We made it. It's Friday, and not only is it Friday, but it is the second anniversary of the worst thing to ever happen in the history of the world, and that is January 6th. So, of course, today, for happy hour, we have to watch January 6th content. We have to. Normally for happy hour, we do happy hour every Friday. It used to only be on my second channel, but now I'm bringing it back to the main channel. And the reason I'm bringing it back to the main channel is just purely a function of, well, math. When I stream it on my main channel, I get more views than when I stream it on my second channel. So we're gonna do stuff on my second channel. Don't get it twisted. I'm not abandoning my second YouTube channel. But the fact of the matter is that I do happy hour because I want people to watch happy hour. Because happy hour, I really think, is one of the most important streams that I do, in that for the last 2+ years, every Friday at 5 p.m., we gather with beer or other assorted concoctions, and we watch the woke left in their full and complete form. We watch their long form trainings. We watch the boring bits. We watch the cringy bits. We don't just take out clips that make them look crazy. We listen to all of it. And I truly believe that people who watch happy hour on a regular basis understand more about the woke left ideology than anyone else on the planet. And that is to include all the influencers that people love. That is to include all the alleged journalists who don't actually do journalism. They wait for people like me to do journalism, and then they copy our journalism. I really do believe that you guys know more than anyone else, and that's a little bit of a scary thing, but it is real. And that's why I brought happy hour back for this week and for all future weeks on my main channel, and we're going to continue to do it here. And I'm actually simulcasting right now to my second channel. So hi everyone over on youtube.com/activelyunwoke. You are welcome to stay there if you want to, but the chat is probably going to be better on my main channel. I see chat from both my main and my second channel on my screen here, so I'll be pulling in chats from both. But you guys it's up to you what chat you want to be in. So today, because it is January 6th, we of course have to watch January 6th content. Let me show you what I got on deck. We're doing a good old-fashioned roundtable. This is from Utica College. And this is a roundtable discussion that they did basically a couple of months after January 6th. They did it on March 7th, 2021, so it was still fresh. The insurrection was still fresh in their minds. And they did a discussion with the Department of History and the Department of Political Science about the events of the Capitol insurrection. And so I think that this is going to be a goodie, man. We are going to get a peek inside how the woke left in academia, in political science and history, view the events of January 6th. And I know this is from a couple years ago. You might argue that maybe I should have found something a little bit more recent, but let's be honest. Have their views really changed? I'm going to guess not. So we are going to watch it. We're going to watch it in its full form. We are going to watch these people probably play into the realm of fantasy in regards to what January 6th actually was. As a reminder, I was at January 6th. I was at the Capitol. If you missed it, I re-aired my live stream that I did right after I got back from the Capitol last night. And I got to tell you, I'm really proud of myself. I was dead on in that live stream. There is not much that I was wrong about in that live stream. And I hadn't watched the news yet. I hadn't really listened to anyone yet. I was absolutely not high, bot. I don't know what you were talking about. And I still got so much right. And I stand by that stream. I stand by everything I said on the evening of January 6th today. Okay, I was wrong about how feckless conservatives are, and I was wrong about a couple things, but mostly it had to do with how cowardly conservatives are and how they didn't go far enough. That's what I was wrong about. I misjudged the cowardice of the political right. But that is the only mistake and misstep that I made. So if you haven't watched that stream, I definitely recommend you do if you're interested in what actually happened at January 6th. And I will certainly be bringing that perspective today as we watch this here stream and we hear from all of these academics, none of whom were actually there, none of whom have any interest in what the truth is at all. And we're going to hear what they have to say. But of course, because this is happy hour, we have a couple of order of businesses to take care of, not the least of which is that you guys got to help me pick out a beer. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to show you guys the beer that I have. Now, my happy hour regulars know this. I'm not going to drink all this beer on the stream. But what we're going to do is I do have a selection of 4 beers that I have just procured from the craft beer store, and I'm going to show them to you, and then you get to vote on which one I drink first. Okay, hang on. All right. Starting our selection today. You guys know I like my fruity beers that don't taste like beer from the Urban South Brewery. Look at that colorful beer. This is a beer called Spooky Spilled, and it is a fruited sour. And this beer is made with Nerds candy. You guys know Nerds candy? Those colorful little things that they get if you spill them out of that fucking box, they get everywhere. This beer is made with Nerds. I love Nerds. I haven't had Nerds in years, but I love them. And so that is our first option today. I'm sure that's going to be a really candy-like beer, and I'm excited about it. The next option we have is from Weld Works Brewing Company. It is a blackberry maple cobbler. So this is a sour ale brewed with vanilla, milk sugar, graham cracker, maple syrup, and blackberry puree. That's option number 2. Option number 3 is I think I bought this one before, but I think my husband drank it before I had the opportunity to. This is the pumpkin pie cheesecake double chocolate milk stout. Of course, pumpkin beers are getting a little bit in short supply because we moved on to winter beers now, but I do love my pumpkin beers. And so pumpkin spice cheesecake in a chocolate milk stout. Come on, man. That's going to be great. And our last beer for selection today is a Camper's Peanut Butter Stout. Peanut butter stout is one of my favorite forms of stout. I love it. I think it's great. All right, guys. So those are the options you have to choose from. I'm going to put that poll in the chat, and you can let me know which beer you want me to drink. And again, this is the chat on my main channel. If you're on my second channel, you won't see the chat today or the poll today anyway. You can still see the chat. And you can let me know what one you want me to start with. And while we're doing that, I almost just dropped a whole bunch of stuff. While we're doing that, what I want to do is tell you about some stuff coming up in my community. Sin asked in the chat earlier, do we have Bitchcraft this weekend? We do not. Bitchcraft is next weekend, Sin. But do you know what we do have this weekend in my supporter community is we have movie night. Movie night is coming back. And so if you want to get involved in movie night and get involved in my supporter Discord, what you need to do is go head over to activelyunwoke.com/support. And you have some options for supporting my work. And that includes joining on Locals as a monthly or annual member. That's $5 a month, $50 a year. That'll get you into my Locals community. My Locals community is the best community on all of Locals. We do 2 Zoom calls every single week on Mondays and Wednesdays. They are private. They are unrecorded. You'll get access to that as well. If you don't want to join Locals, that's cool, man. You can join Patreon. Patreon also gets access to those 2 Zoom calls that we do every single week. They're also going to get access to the supporter Discord. You can also become a paying member on my Substack. I have a goal of getting 100 new monthly supporters on Substack this month to keep all of my articles for free. So that's an option there as well. And these things will all get you access to my supporter Discord, where we do weekly movie nights on Sundays at 8 p.m. This month is Jennifer January because Jennifer is our illustrious host for movie nights. And so Jennifer got to pick out all the movies, and she wants us to watch The Jazz Singer on Sunday at 8 p.m. I've never seen it. I don't know if you guys have, but we will be doing that in the supporter Discord. And you can get access to that by coming and becoming a member of my community on whatever platform you would like to become a member on. And I do try to give lots of perks and special access to my community members, including Bitchcraft, which will be next week. next Saturday at 3 p.m. And you can come and join us for that. And also, we do have book club coming up. We are reading Ender's Game. We're not just watching the movie, we're reading the book because the book is better. It's one of the best books. It's one of my favorite books. I'm really excited we're reading it for book club. Please read the book and don't just watch the movie because the book has stuff going on in it that doesn't make it into the movie, as tends to happen. And so we are doing that right now too. That's another thing you'll get by becoming a member in my community on Locals, on Patreon, on Substack. You could also become a member on the YouTube channel that you're on my primary YouTube channel. That'll get you access to like the supporter Discord as well, and all that good stuff. But might I recommend Locals? If you're going to become a supporter, Locals, and you're looking for that type of community, Locals is really going to be your best one. Honestly, you can support me on whatever platform you want if you appreciate the work I'm doing, but Locals is going to be your best one, so far as I'm concerned. All right, let me take a look in the poll. You guys want me to drink the Nerds beer? I knew it. I knew we were going to do the Nerds beer. If you're drinking something before we get started with our January 6th woke presentation, let us know what you're drinking in the chat. Let's get this nerd beer out and poured. I also, just so you guys know, I didn't let you vote on this one. Southern Tier has come out with a peanut butter cup imperial stout, and if you've never had a Southern Tier beer, Southern Tier is one of my favorite breweries by far. Their beers are so good. This is a 10% beer. I might partake of this later. This is like a special treat, though. I didn't make you vote on it because I'm not drinking this one first. I don't start with the 10% beer. That's a bad idea, all right? But I want you to know that I have it, and I want you to know that it exists because I was very excited to see it in the beer store today. Hang on. I got put back in the cooler. I do actually have a little cooler of that keeps my beer nice and cold. Oh shit! Ah! My beer just fizzied all over my desk. Oh no! No! Fuck you, nerd beer! It's even spitting at me. You guys don't even know the mess that's being made over here. Hang on. Oh my god! I wish I could show you what's happening. It's spitting at me. It's literally spitting at me. I can't even get it open. Look at this. Every time I go. You guys see that? I'm trying to open the beer. It's spitting all over my desk. The beer is everywhere. It's everywhere. Oh my god! I don't know if I'm gonna be able to drink this. Oh, I got it open. I got it open. This is a mess now. It definitely tastes like candy, though. I'll tell you that. Hang on. Maybe. Oh! You know what I have on my desk? I have Lysol wipes. Oh my god. Thank God. I have something here that I can clean this off with. Hang on, guys. We're going to get started in a second. I have a beer emergency. Well, that was not an introduction to the show that I was expecting. My gosh. I've got beer all over the place now. I hope this beer is good as a result. Okay, I've got it poured. It's kind of ugly if I'm honest about it. It's ugly. It looks gross. Let's see how it tastes. Tastes like candy sour. It does. It tastes good. It looks gross. It tastes good. That's good enough for me. All right, guys. Please mount that like button. Let's get this show started. I will continue to clean up this mess. Well, it's not supposed to be clear. It's got all sorts of crap in it. All right. I will clean up this mess as we get this show started, guys. You are here for January 6th happy hour. We are watching a presentation, a roundtable discussion about the worst event in American history put on by the Political Science and History Department at Utica College a couple months after the Great Insurrection. Please mount that like button for me. Let's get this show on the road.
Final roundtable discussion of our series, This Is Not Who We Are, or Is It? Democracy, Insurrection, and the Myth of American Exceptionalism.
Look at this lady. Hang on, I gotta turn off the captions. There is a lady in the bottom. There's two people wearing a fucking mask on this Zoom. You know this Zoom is going to be exactly what we think it is when we see two women wearing a mask on the Zoom. Yes, insurrect the like button. I like that, Benjamin, a lot.
I'm pleased to have back all of our participants, our speakers for the series in alphabetical order: Dr. Sherry Cash, Dr. Peter DeSimone, Eric Halliday, Robert Halliday, Rachel Hanna, Dr. Clem Harris, Luke Perry, and Dr. Daniel Tagliarina.
He does a disservice to the name Luke Perry.
Taken a nice chunk out of their schedules to participate in this series, to prepare the papers, and really do a yeoman's job.
They wrote a paper on this.
What has become I think a very difficult question, and but very serious and popular topic, a concerning topic in American history. So just kind of the ground rules for this evening. They're very few, honestly. Some of us have prepared statements, others don't. Once we everyone gives their statements, it's a discussion, which includes both the panelists and members of the audience who I've really appreciated your participation for the last month, because that's how long we've been doing this.
A whole month. Wow.
With that, I will just give a brief statement to kind of center us on this whole notion of American exceptionalism. So as I see it, there are three pillars of American exceptionalism that are described in the Declaration of Independence and that are contained in the sentence examined by Luke Perry last week. That is, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So the first pillar from the time of the American Revolution was establishing a country based on a new political framework where citizens, not subjects, would govern themselves. This is the society that Ronald Reagan would eventually call the shining city on the hill. But European observers at the time, and even a century later, called unworkable and bordering on anarchy. Nonetheless, Americans somehow seem to make it work, yet as Dan Tagliarina eloquently discussed in the second talk in this series, American democracy is rife with undemocratic institutions. The second pillar, of course, is capitalism and free trade.
Oh God, here we go.
This is what defined the self-made man in America, because royal titles
They're not going to like capitalism.
Supposedly counted for little. Of course, one of the monkey wrenches in this equation was slavery. And its legacy, because liberty and the pursuit of happiness were always beyond the reach of African Americans, even after emancipation, and I would argue to this day. In their talks, Clem Harris and Sherry Cash clearly showed that despite the sacred words in the Declaration of Independence, all men are not created equal, and that attacks on racial and ethnic minorities were common and accepted by most in American society. The final pillar of American exceptionalism, and the one, if you Google American exceptionalism, you'll find the most, is foreign policy, which from the start has always been America first, long before Donald Trump borrowed the slogan from the largely anti-Semitic America First Committee that opposed America's entrance into World War II. We've set economic policies.
Trump used it because Reagan used it,
for selfish reasons, and have been responsible for civilian deaths of near genocidal proportions. The firebombing campaigns of Japan are but one example.
Oh my God.
General Curtis LeMay, in fact, the man who orchestrated them, stated to his aides after the war that if we hadn't won, we would be charged as war criminals for the deliberate bombing of civilian targets. And World War II is neither the first nor last time Americans fought wars in that manner. Our bombing campaigns and use of chemical agents are responsible for over 1 million civilian deaths in the Vietnam War. In short, American foreign policy is neither exceptional nor different from the countries we often condemn.
Well,
Regardless,
American
there seems to be
exceptionalism is
some kind of
considered
an
white
unwritten
supremacy,
rule,
remember?
an almost fanatic devotion to the idea of American exceptionalism, a refusal to accept the fact that America and Americans are no more exceptional than any other people or country that claims the moniker.
Why shouldn't people think that they're exceptional? Why shouldn't people think that their country is exceptional? I don't think there's anything wrong with thinking that America is a pretty great place to live, especially when you compare it to some of the other places in the world. And I would suspect that other places in the world would think that their country might be exceptional. And I'm not saying you have to have blind faith or blind allegiance to where you happen to be born or where you happen to live. That doesn't seem correct to me. But like, I like America. I think America's all right. Now, even saying that, I want New Hampshire to secede from America because I don't think that we are on a tenable path, mostly because of people like this. But like, I think that the idea that America was founded on was good. If we could somehow get back to that, I think that that'd be pretty great. And I'm allowed to say that. I'm allowed to say that I like living here. I think it's the best place to live in the world. I don't want to live anywhere else. And based on that alone, I think that America is exceptional. It has been an exceptional experiment. Will it continue? Who knows? These things tend to have a shelf life, but I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that. And it is certainly not white supremacist to say that. I'm sure people in Korea think Korea's pretty great. I'm sure people in Japan think Japan is the best country to live in the world. I'm sure people in China are forced to say it's the best place to live in the world because if they don't, their government will execute them. But like most places in the world think that they live in the best place in the world, otherwise they wouldn't live there.
Barack Obama got in trouble for making this statement. I believe it was when he was running for president. Events of the last year, however, may have given us pause, or at least given some of us pause. The murder of George Floyd, the rise of white supremacy, and its apparent acceptance in society, not to mention the support of the former president. Congressmen who
the
legislate for their
support of the
careers
former
rather than the
president
law,
is proof that
a botched
America's not
pandemic
exceptional.
response, and an insurrection launched by a populist president intent on stealing the election have laid bare, contrary to what President Biden
Look at that
claims,
Shelby woman right next to him. She looks like she's going to cry.
The question from my perspective, and that I'd like to explore this evening, is where do we go from here? And with that, I yield the floor to whoever would like to jump in with their statement. I guess that's going to be Robert. He's itching to speak. Or get it out of the way, one or the other.
Well, I was until you stole my thunder and said half the things I was intending to say.
That's why I went first.
But I think that what David said has been very interesting. When you look at the lineup of talks, it's sometimes hard to see what exactly the thread is that links them all together until you've actually listened to them. And I think that for me anyway, looking at this, the forces that led to January 6th were
forces.
neither unique nor unique, neither in place nor in time, because as Clemmy Harris and Sherry Cash showed us, these are things that go back a long way in US history. And as Eric Halliday and Rachel Hanna and Dan Tagliarina showed us, they are woven deeply into our culture, both our popular culture, digital culture, legal culture, all of those things. It's also not an American thing. Peter DeSimone was very clear about that in his talk, and looking at the parallels between what happened in pre-Nazi Germany and early Nazi Germany and what happened here. And it's also not something that's going to stop now. It doesn't stop with the election, as Luke Perry very eloquently told us.
I hate that they're calling him Luke
gonna
Perry.
affect the
It's totally fucking with me.
affect
It's
the
not
nature
that
of the
Luke
presidency
Perry.
and the future of where we go as a country.
That might just be
So
an age thing. That might be
we may be
dating me.
academics, but these are not academic
Those who
questions.
know.
And I wanted to go back to what I said in my opening, my talk when I was opening the series, and requote and say, what then must we do? Because we have spent 20 some hours of time across all of our various talks, and they have been wonderful, and I have learned a huge amount from them. But if we are not doing something, this will happen again. And
God willing, it happens
we're not, as
again.
I said in my opening talk,
God willing.
superheroes who have to swoop in and save the day. But we are citizens.
I said it.
We are informed citizens. We are concerned citizens. And the question that we really need, I think, to address this evening is, what then must we do?
I'm happy to go next if that's okay with everybody.
Absolutely.
I've got a short statement, and I think it relates to some of what Dr. Holliday said. And so I think it's a good fit at this moment.
Exactly, studio hour.
So I'd like
God
to briefly
forbid.
share 2 key views that perhaps merit further discussion. The first, methodological, and
He
the second,
died?
substantive.
I didn't know he died.
I believe the
Aw.
insurrection's roots were derived from historical and institutional dynamics, insightfully discussed by my colleagues, as well as cultural, theoretical, sociological, and psychological considerations that I and others sought to emphasize. And one of the interesting things about this particular venue, I think, is that because we have several of us with different disciplines, we get to draw on different tools to try to make sense of the very complicated situation. And we're probably not all going to do that the same way, which I find really interesting and really beneficial in terms of educational value. The second view is that I believe the insurrection
It was a horrible show, and I loved
in
it.
a long history
I fucking loved
of
it.
white supremacy.
All of it, except for the
But was
college
not a
years.
clear
High school was the
carbon
best. Not so
copy
much after they
of
went to
early
college.
historical
Definitely
moments,
not how they graduated from
particularly
college. F that.
regarding the modern presidency. Nor is Donald Trump and the insurrection he inspired so powerful that his brand of politics is primed to become a dominant force for years to come.
Oh, little did they know.
Now, no
Little
doubt,
did they
President
anticipate Trump would get nominated for
countless
Speaker of the
norms
House.
of the presidency and modern democracy in America for personal and partisan gain, which deeply concerns my discipline of political science. Longstanding historical and institutional dynamics do not fade quickly, but historically unpopular one-term presidents typically do, particularly when they, as with reference by Dr. Whitner, fail to mobilize the country beyond a deadly national crisis, and their party is voted out of both chambers of Congress and the White House in just a few years. Still, it's vitally important to
He
understand
had no idea what was coming.
how conservatives, as well as liberals,
Man.
interpret the Trump presidency. A perspective that
How is that,
I think
Luke?
is a bit lacking, even in well-intentioned and valuable discussions like this.
I wonder if Luke Perry, who's probably a PhD in political science, understands that there are actually more perspectives on this than just conservative and liberal. My guess is he doesn't understand that, but, you know, let's find out.
My scholarship over the last decade suggests that Republican Party dynamics and electoral politics cannot be completely understood through descriptions of ignorance, racism, or fear of Donald Trump. At the same time, leadership is necessary at all levels of government and society to restore America on a clear trajectory to continue expanding democratic norms, as Dr. Harris and I discussed following my talk. And this needs to unfold, and this leadership needs to be particularly focused in cultivating a multiracial conception of democracy that has been lacking throughout American history. I think this will require sober, nuanced, interdisciplinary assessments, which I think we've all done our best here to provide. So
Yes,
I'm reminded of Abraham
sober
Lincoln's
and nuanced, and definitely not
second
Marxist.
inaugural address, where he said, quote, "Let us strive on to finish the work we are in to bind up the nation's wounds," unquote.
Wait,
Like muscles strained through
seriously?
great exertion.
They arrested Ashley Babbitt's mother at the Capitol today? Are you shitting me? Wow. I mean, I guess no one should be really surprised, but why did Kevin McCarthy allow that? Kevin McCarthy, who's currently occupying the office of the Speaker of the House, even though he has not been elected the Speaker of the House, even though the Republicans are going to cave at any minute. They're going to cave. We know they're going to cave. We always knew they were going to cave. They don't know how to do anything but cave. So Kevin McCarthy will inevitably be Speaker of the House at some point rather soon, but he's not the Speaker of the House yet. So why the fuck did he allow it? Like why did, like, he's in the office, like who, like, why did he allow it? Come on. Thank you, Meeks. I appreciate it. I've always been here. YouTube hid me, but I've always been here, guys. Please mount that like button if you haven't yet. Please subscribe to the channel. If, like Meeks, maybe you lost me for a little bit, but I'm always around. Let's keep going.
My personal hope and focus is working toward our country emerging from this moment with an even stronger and more inclusive democracy than we had 5 short years ago.
That'll be the answer to everything.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you, Luke.
If you don't mind, Dr. Witten, I'd like to follow.
Absolutely.
Perry. I'd like to thank Dr. Halliday and Perry for the wonderful opening statements. Folks, shortly after the deadly insurrection at the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2
Who does he think died?
The Capitol PD gathered in the rotunda. Based
Oh,
on
here
a
we go.
BuzzFeed
Here we
news
go.
story, the veteran Black officer who participated in the interview joined another Black officer in the rotunda, and in his words, quote, "Tears just started streaming down my face," unquote. "What the F, man?" unquote, he said. Quote, "Is this America? What the F just happened?"
I want to say I have video on my phone to this day of the Capitol Police standing around and doing nothing. I have video of this, of them standing around and then them marching from one location to another and continuing to stand around and do nothing. Like, I'm sorry, no Capitol Police were killed by the people on January 6th. That is completely wrong. That is completely untrue. They tear gassed people and then they stood around and they did nothing. They did nothing. And everyone who was there and saw it knows I'm telling the truth, but I do actually have the video on my phone to this day.
"I am so sick and tired of this SH," unquote. Soon the Black officer began screaming so that all within the rotunda, especially his white colleagues, could hear what he had just experienced. Quote, "These racist A's, terrorist," unquote, he shouted. "I just got called the N-word 15 times today.
Bullshit.
Trump
Bullshit.
did this.
Bullshit.
And we
Bullshit.
got all
Bullshit.
of these
I want
effing
receipts.
people
Bullshit.
in our department that voted for him. How the F can you support him?" unquote, he asked. The officer's description reveals what he and other Capitol PD officers endured that day, as many of them fought valiantly to protect the U.S.
Fought
Capitol
valiantly. They
and
stood
the very
around and did
workings of
nothing.
American democracy.
Oh my
But
God.
for Black officers, as has been intimated so far,
I cannot even with these people.
who were forced to endure anti-Black racist.
It is really something. I'll tell you what. It is real. I don't know how many of you in the chat have experienced this. It is really something when you are at an event, as I was at January 6th at the Capitol, and you see what I am so glad I went to January 6th to this day, mostly because I got to see for myself exactly what happened. And I spent a lot of time just looking around, just walking around and looking and seeing what people were doing, because I knew that this was going to happen. I knew that they were going to lie about it. It is really something when you see rows and rows and rows of Capitol Police officers standing around and doing nothing and being bothered by no one. And then you come out and hear people say, those people were calling them the N-words over and over and over again, and they were racist and blah, 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 and they put them all in danger. Please, bro, please. You're lying. You're lying. It is the most giant red pill to swallow, to know explicitly through your actual experience what the truth is, and then to see people like this spinning the lies that they've been spinning for the last 2 years.
Abuse, being called the N-word repeatedly, witnessing the parading of the Confederate flag.
There was one
learning
Confederate
that some
flag, and it was
white
probably a
officers had
Fed.
taken selfies with insurrectionists. And most importantly, when compared to the heightened police and National Guard response to Black Lives Matter protests the previous summer, management's decision to treat the mob rally as a free speech protest.
That was Nancy Pelosi, bro.
When you take it into that consideration, the officer's description falls within the African-American protest tradition and the long Black freedom struggle against white supremacy and structural racism in American law enforcement and criminal justice.
Listen to this guy defend the police. The Capitol Police represent African-American struggle for half a century. Come on.
The answer to the officer's question, which ties directly to the question
Brent,
this
we can
series has
see
sought
you.
to answer. This is not who we are.
Maybe not in that way, though.
Or is it? The answer is yes. This is America. And yes, this is who we are. And it strikes at the very heart of our professed ideas on democracy, institutions, norms, and I dare say, the idea of American exceptionalism, as my colleagues have stated. On January 27th, folks, I sought to explain how we got to this moment, what accounts for the insurrection. I talked about Donald Trump and the lost cause. I talked about the debates that were happening in Congress at the particular time, the ways in which many sought to talk about the importance of what occurred, to hold the South accountable, others saying, no, 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 let's just move forward and not really pay attention to it, not to hold the Southerners accountable for their treasonous acts.
What?
What struck me about that—
Is he talking about the Civil War or now?
What struck me about that are the recent comments from Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, who, after witnessing an overwhelming amount of evidence during the impeachment trial, declared in a recent interview, quote, "This will get me in trouble, but I don't care," unquote, he said. Quote, "Groups of agitators," unquote, he argued, quote, "are to blame for the Capitol riot and not tens of thousands of Trump supporters," unquote. Johnson continued his defense of the mob Trump incited when he said, quote, "The group of people that supported Trump, the hundreds of thousands who attended those Trump rallies, those are the people that love this country. They never would have done what happened on January 6th. That is a group of people that love freedom. That's a group of people we need to unify and keep on our side."
Yes.
Now, this is
for the most
extremely
part.
important when you take into consideration, I think, the extremely insightful talk that Dr. Perry provided us, right? That's extremely important. Will this eventually fade? Quite possibly, yes. But at the very moment we are having this discussion, there is clear evidence that says that there are a significant amount of our institutional leaders that are willing to adhere very closely to this extremist wing of the Republican Party. Let's go a little further in what Johnson said.
The fact that these people think the Republicans
Johnson
are
then questioned
extremists
whether the
are
group
like,
was
man.
truly an armed insurrection.
No, it
Quote,
wasn't.
"When you hear the word armed, don't you think of firearms?"
Yes.
Here's the question I would have liked to ask. How many firearms were confiscated?
Not
How
many.
many shots were fired?
None.
Unquote.
Well, by the Capitol Police,
Johnson's
there were.
comments are a 21st century version of Democrat Andrew Rogers of New Jersey's defense of the South's revolution, that Confederates had not murdered hundreds of thousands of loyal Americans, that they were not murderers, not thieves, not felons, but simply political convicts before the altar of patriotism. Johnson's comments constitute a window into a larger problem that at the very least represents a massive civics deficit in our understanding of democracy and political violence. Folks, there is a thread through all of our talks, and one has been the missing of history in informing our understanding of democracy, our understanding of how institutions and norms work.
Listen, I don't believe in violence, and I would never do the thing that I'm about to say. I don't believe in violence. I don't believe in it. I am just this is in my head. This is not in real life. I'm not encouraging anyone to do this. You should never engage in violence unless you yourself have had violence enacted upon you in the form of like a physical altercation, and then it's cool because you need to be able to defend yourself. But does anyone else just want to like punch this guy in the face? I'm not saying I would do it. I would never do it. But like this guy is so pompous. He is so arrogant. He's so like it's so annoying. He thinks that he is like this guy is the reason why people hate academics. And that has nothing to do with his skin color, man. I don't care if he's black, brown, fucking Asian, Native American, mixed, like biracial, like whatever. I don't care. If this guy was white as the fresh fallen snow with blonde hair and blue eyes, was like the perfect Aryan, I would still want to fucking punch him in the face because he's that annoying to me. Maybe I'm overstating it a little bit. Maybe I'm just like, maybe there's some January 6th pent up rage that's been built up over like the repeated denunciations and shit like that. But this guy is annoying. He is annoying. He is not grounded in reality. He makes everything up and then like makes all of it about racism and then does it with this air of superiority where you can't dare question what he's saying. It's just so aggravating. It's like these people are not. This guy is a lunatic. Really think about that. Just because this is the type of guy that like would get totally like the mistake that people make with this guy is he is an academic and he has a bookcase full of books behind him and he talks properly and he says everything calmly and with no emotion, and so people don't think that he's psychotic, but he is psychotic because he is not hinged into what reality is at all. And not only is he psychotic, but he's actively training other people to be psychotic. That's all. Don't engage in violence. The end.
This massive civics deficit can be seen when you consider the recent remarks of Dave
Thank
Ball,
you, American Legend. I
GOP
appreciate
leader
that.
of Washington County, Pennsylvania, who in explicit support of
Oh,
a
you
state
also
GOP
have read a lot of
effort to
books?
censor
I have as
Senator
well.
Pat Toomey for having voted his conscience, explicitly stated, quote, "We didn't send him there to vote his conscience. We didn't send him there to do the right thing," unquote. The struggle for supremacy of the GOP between institutionalists and its anti-establishment wing, i.e. Mitch McConnell and versus Donald Trump, has led CNN
well, at
to
least he
pose the
understands that.
following question, quote,
I seriously thought he was about to call Mitch McConnell anti-establishment, and I was about ready to I was about ready to take a drink of my beer that has spilled all over the place to spit it out if he called Mitch McConnell anti-establishment. Cheers, everyone.
extremist wing of the GOP too big to fail, unquote. This is indeed a critical question to consider when you take into consideration a recent poll from the American Enterprise Institute that found that 55% of Republicans support use of force, i.e. political violence, as a means to stop what they perceive to be a decline of the traditional American way of life. So how do we move forward in convincing 55% of the Republican Party that political violence is antithetical
Perhaps you
to
hinge yourself
what we
back into
consider to be
reality
American
and actually get to know the
values?
Republican Party?
That is something that I think I enjoy talking over with my colleagues as we try to get to an answer to the question, where do we go from here? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. A very thoughtful and insightful statement. Who else? Anybody else care to go?
I'll go ahead and jump in here.
Okay, thank you.
All right,
He's
so
got
I
pink
want to thank
hair!
my colleagues who've given talks across this series, as well as those who have already shared their sort of opening remarks.
I'm not used to seeing men
Echoing
with
a
pink
lot of
hair.
what we've heard, I really wanted to sort of focus in on finding the sort of commonalities as we've all taken different disciplinary or expertise-based approaches, looking at American history, looking at American institutions, current politics, even a more international perspective, in addition to historical, as well as just legal. All of this comes together, and I think there is something that we can say we've been saying.
Oh,
and
I'm
that can
sorry,
help
bot. I'm sorry. He, they. You're
hopefully
correct. I
frame a
need to
lot
be
of the
respectful
discussion that we'll
of the
continue to have
pronouns.
today. So from my perspective as one of the presenters in this series, what I've heard from the other talks is that white supremacy, racism, white supremacy, racism, and many of the roots of the insurrection that happened on January 6th have long been baked into our founding. They are interwoven in our institutions, and they are also a part of the basic way of doing things in this country and have been from the beginning.
That's why he has
However,
pink hair. He's fighting the
the other thing
patriarchy.
we've heard in many of these is that our founding principles, our ideals, our values, and even broader ethical considerations all claim a special place in the American psyche and American culture, push back on a lot of this. I mean, we see it in the Declaration of Independence.
You know this guy feels inferior because his office is basically the size of a broom closet. Look at this guy's office. It is the size of my closet. I don't want to trust this guy with anything. He's got like a little desk and a filing cabinet and a window. At least he's got a window, I guess. But they basically stuck this guy in the corner, and he probably has a massive inferiority complex because of it.
Where we've made some of these claims. And this produces a lot of the tensions that we see that are reflected in the very title of this talk series. This is not who we are, or is it? And we have answers actually on both sides. As much as we have precedent for what happened, we also have these ideals that we've been striving to fulfill and utterly failing to fulfill at different times, but that have been guiding impulses, things that we keep returning to as a country. So thus, we can see that the insurrection did not come out of nowhere. We can also see that Trump's role, while important and central to what happened, is less as a primary cause and more as of a symptom of a much larger problem and many other problems that are built into these sort of founding tensions that we have. We see it in calls to better live up to our values. We see it in backlash to attempts to do exactly that. And we see it in squabbles over egalitarian and reactionary forces that have always been at the heart of American political discourse. In listening to all my fellow speakers' presentations, I've been struck at how we all brought different perspectives on what happened, and we've highlighted various contextual elements to it all, but all of us, in one way or another, hit on these core tensions. I think these are important realizations. I also think it's important that we don't lose sight of what happened, why
what do
it
you think happened?
and what it means that it happened.
What do you think happened?
Similarly, as has been echoed in many of the talks, we need to be careful now, at this moment, not to accept a quiet peace at the expense, and unity at the expense of those who have been marginalized, those who have been harmed, and those who find themselves the targets of continued discrimination. So where this leaves us, I believe, is knowing that as unprecedented as these specific elements of the attack on the Capitol on January 6th were, the underlying tensions that produced this have great precedents. They run deep in American history. What does seem newer, and I think also warrants further discussion, is how many people in positions of power not only embrace these positions embraced by those who attack the Capitol, but are willing to overlook not just attacks on those who have been historically marginalized, but attacks on themselves. This creates new versions of older problems that we all, as a country, and hopefully us as panelists, can start to address and talk about. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tagliarina, for also very fascinating comment. Others presenters would like to prepare a statement. I don't know, Sherry, Rachel, and Eric, or Peter. Yes, no, maybe. Sherry, you're muted if you're trying to speak.
I always do that, or often do that. I was just saying that I was really wrapped up in hearing everyone else's comments. And of course, I mean, well, so much to discuss. So
Why don't we take a minute and do a meditation and do some deep breathing?
There are multiple paths of inquiry through which to understand the January 6th insurrection. One of those ways is to take a historical perspective on the event, both in terms of the insurrection as part of a long history of mob violence in American history, and in terms of the history and context that led to the January 6th insurrection in particular. Now, we've spoken about January 6th, again, through multiple paths. And I guess with all
none
of
them
that,
actually understand what happens.
In terms of
is what you should all
historical
take away
view,
from this.
What I'd like to get to is, how do we see the past as how can we use the past? How can we shape it as a usable past? Now, I focused on the 1863 riots in several New York cities, but there are others we might have explored in the colonial period. But then in the 19th century, the nativist and anti-Catholic riots of the 1830s and 40s, or clashes between Irish Protestants and Irish Catholics at various points in the 19th century. And there are other examples. What they have in common is a central pillar of equating other with illegitimate, suspect, deviant, or just plain un-American, and a perceived loss of status in a society organized around a logic of privilege. Now, if we widen the scope, other violent arenas come into focus. More to the point, the legal and cultural hegemony of the slave system. Thereafter, the Jim Crow regime in America sanctioned an inherently violent social structure. When these institutions became episodically permeable, the response was brutal, indeed. So, for example, with slave rebellions, suspected as well as real, and Black self-determination met with lynching. And these examples address only overt violence. We could widen the scope further to include slower ways of repressing citizens, not only in terms of violence as in hate crimes, mass incarceration, and police brutality against Black and brown communities, but in terms of disequities in health, education, labor, housing. We could go on. And these wider scopes too have at their core a concept of other, illegitimate, suspect, deviant, or just plain un-American, and a perceived loss of status in a society organized around a logic of privilege. Again, these are old attitudes in American history, as we've all pointed to.
Attitudes.
So maybe a more immediate response must come through what makes these attitudes explode. In terms of 1863, which bears disturbing similarities with 2021, the elements were a political party or the loudest voices in it, with the companion media exploiting, if not sharing, those very attitudes.
They
An
think the
economic
media
context that heightens a
is
sense of
supporting Trump
dispossession,
supporters. Are you
and an
shitting me?
opposing political party that appears, at least appears, to attend to the needs of the perceived outsiders, the ones now depicted as un-American, for claiming democratic values. History warns us to heed these conditions in our own day. But ultimately, so what? We readily see the similarities, but what do we do about it? Which is what we're all asking. Unfortunately, we probably have a long road ahead, one that will involve making candid history widely available, the continuing
That means
diversity,
critical race theory.
continuing
That
diversification,
means critical race theory.
which, as I argued last time, is more important than the concept of diversity. It's diversification meaningfully.
This woman is literally saying January 5th or January 6th is the reason that we need to teach more critical race theory in schools. That's what she's saying.
Sharing of power equitably among elected officials and corporate leadership, and a changing population that will eventually melt the homogenous majority. All studies show that that's going to happen. History takes a long view, and I'm hopeful about that, but I fear that this is going to be a difficult transition and may even get worse in the short term. And at least the best might be until we reach the next generation being in leadership at the soonest. Time as an element cannot be avoided, but at the same time, it's not going to happen on its own. So I would suggest that we are that transition now and every day, we are that transition in the classroom, at the workplace, at the polls, in places of worship, and around the family table.
Thank you, Dr. Cash. Very interesting. I guess, Dr. DeSimone, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, actually, Dr. Cash gave me a perfect segue into basically what has not been covered by some of our other speakers. Again, first, this speaking series was phenomenal. Again, I learned not just a lot, but very precise to see how much comes from so many different perspectives, as many of my colleagues here have touched on. And everyone's touched on something that I would have said. I've been joking back and forth here with Dr. Whitner about how everyone said anything that I would have said already. But Dr. Cash gave me a good segue in this mentioning of the other, and several other of my colleagues mentioned that what we're seeing is this backlash, this fear of traditional American values. And that brings up the ultimate question of part of our title is of this idea of American exceptionalism. That to believe in exceptionalism is to believe that you are, well, exceptional to everything else, that you are unique and therefore removed from what else exists and what else has come before you. And to bring it back into that defies the international context of what my own presentation was trying to bring this back into.
I'm ignoring people in the chat right now.
History,
you guys are being ridiculous.
Society that has ever existed has considered itself exceptional.
I appreciate it, but you're being ridiculous.
Whether it's to be the chosen ones of God, or whether it's to be the birthplace and cradle of democracy, whether it's to be the birthplace of law, etc., and so on. Every single person, every single society that's come along has at some point declared itself exceptional to what has come before it and what else exists around it. And so how can we today claim exceptionalism when everyone has been exceptional? To steal a quotation, to modify a quotation from The Incredibles, if everyone's exceptional, then no one is. And so that's something to consider. And then to bring in this idea of the other as well too, is that that's always been a defining trait as well too. The other has always been dangerous in history and in the present. Every society needs that other to champion against as a way to buttress their own exceptionalism as well too. Whether it is the barbarians on the other side of the river, whether it is the stronger empire on the other side.
You guys are all
of
beautiful
the
and stunning
ocean,
and brave. I hope you know
the
that.
other is always out there to get
You're
you,
always
and that's
stunning.
something
You're
that
you're
has
all stunning and
constantly
brave
moved through history.
and beautiful.
And so that is, again, something to try to place our own experience in what we're witnessing right now, and how we better understand that. Is that at some point, the other is always presented as the enemy, the other is always dangerous, and the other is always threatening our way of life. And so there's usually a violent backlash to that. And in some cases, the first backlash is history. And that's something that in the last month alone, since the insurrection, and even leading up to that, we have seen history come under direct attack. We have seen it come under attack by our own eyes. To see what we have all witnessed and experienced, to see it rewritten as in, no, you're wrong, that's not what really happened, is precisely what my own talk is about, and has been brought up in several other talks.
Wait.
That-
So this guy who has Doctor in front of his name, Dr. Peter, not to be confused with King Peter of the chat, who is obviously far superior to this guy. This guy is literally saying that basically to him, January 6th was a traumatic event in which all of human history was questioned. And then when people who were actually like at January 6th, like me, are like, bro, it didn't actually happen like that. And this guy's like, it is an affront to history for you to tell me that I am wrong about January 6th. These are people who like some of the people on this roundtable probably went to therapy over January 6th. Can we just like contemplate that for a second? Like, they probably had to go to, like, they weren't even there. They saw it on TV, probably watched hours and hours and hours of MSNBC on about January 6th, and then got themselves so worked up about it that some of them probably had to go to, like, trauma therapy or something. And now they're like, don't you tell us that we were wrong. These people are so unhinged from reality.
we are, as again, I have several other of my colleagues have already now called for it, and we have to be vigilant of as well too, to see it happening, to witness it for ourselves, to be told what you saw did not happen the way you saw it happen, is the fight we are now currently facing. And so I'm glad that we've had this series to bring that to light, and to see it play out for the last month allows us to see that process that is not anything new. It's not an exceptional process.
They basically brainwashed themselves.
I'll leave it
They
there.
did. Isn't that impressive?
Thank you very much, Dr.
Let this be a
DeSimone.
lesson to you. Don't
And
be these people.
Last but not least, Eric Halliday and Rachel Hanna.
Thank you, everyone. As the only students on the panel, we decided to wait till last while the quality went first. So we'll do our best to try to add something. So I'll go first. We kind of divided this into two halves, and then Rachel will finish strong. We were thinking about the title of this speaker series, and is this who we are, and the introspection and the reflection baked into that question. And from our lens, which is the legal lens, and looking at how the law has classified and approached violence of different types in different eras, the answer is yes, and that's both good and bad. And what we mean by that is that if you look at the legal history in this field, there are two strands, almost like DNA, that form the path to where we are now.
Utica.
And the first is systemic, institutionalized, bone-deep racist violence, and violence against other socioeconomic minorities, Jews, women, we can go on. But white supremacy, misogyny, everything that we saw on January 6th has been baked into American culture for a long time. From slavery to the different iterations of the Klan to modern day domestic terror.
It was
violence
the Klan
against women in different forms, like the incel movement.
Oh my
This is
God.
absolutely a part of American history.
I was just fighting with incels before this. I go from fighting with incels in Twitter Spaces to fighting with academics who believe that everyone who's not them is an incel.
But another part of American history, the second strand in this DNA metaphor, is intermittent and inconsistent, passionate attempts to rectify that violence, right? So you have the evil of slavery, but then you have the brief spasm of the 13th and 14th Amendments and the Ku Klux Klan Acts and the laws during Reconstruction designed to combat at least some of those evils. You have the Civil Rights Acts of the 60s, you have the Violence Against Women Act in the 90s, you have these moments in which society takes a fresh set of eyes and looks at violence that has always been there and repression that has always been part of the country and attempted to do something about it. And we think that we as in a country are approaching a new inflection point in which these patterns and systems of violence are always present, but now they seem to be recognized in a way that they weren't necessarily 5, 10, or 15 years ago. And the question of what we do is particularly pressing because although
he hasn't said anything of substance yet. Does anyone else notice that?
Our society,
he's made no points
to confront it.
That's how you know he's a student.
Consistently inconsistent.
And so when we're thinking about not just assessing who we are, but the other question that this series was supposed to sort of look at, the what are we going to do about it? How are we going to move forward question. I think the history that so many presenters have outlined that can and should inform the problem that we're facing and how we think about the problem that was January 6th and what that means in its broader context in our society. I think it's equally important that we use history and some of the history that Eric just laid out to inform what we do about it. Because we've seen really good moments, which is what Eric was just talking about. We've also seen ways in which the law specifically, when trying
critical
to
race theory, critical race theory,
this
critical
sort of
race
problem,
theory.
and for us, again, we're sort of looking specifically at domestic terrorism, but these domestic national security issues a bit more broadly. We can see that sometimes efforts to combat
I agree, Brent. It was really racist of him to do that.
End up getting turned against
he better be non-binary
other
or
groups
something.
in society, and they're often minority groups. So at its sort of broadest conception, we can think about the way that domestic national security concerns throughout history have been turned against the Japanese during World War I, against Martin Luther King, the leaders of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, the way that parts of our surveillance apparatus were turned against the Muslim population in this country after 9/11. And so as much as we need to understand the severity of the problem, understand where it comes from, and it's in our historical context in this country, it's also really important to understand how that history informs what we can do and the consequences of those actions. So in the aftermath of the Capitol riot, the phrase that was most commonly being used among politicians and commentators was domestic terrorism. We saw that again and again, and
really?
again from people across the political spectrum, actually. And so there seems to be some sort of broad consensus, not everybody, but a fairly broad consensus that this is a problem. It's a problem of political violence, and maybe the label is domestic terrorism. I think if we think back to the ways in which that label or a broader domestic national security threat label has been used against some of the more vulnerable groups in our society.
This woman probably has a PhD now. I know I'm assuming that she's a woman.
Language, one, it has a serious cultural impact in terms of our awareness and how we think about the problem. And two, that language translates into the law, and laws have consequences. We're talking about serious criminal violations when that language of domestic terrorism or other terms like it get translated into law. And so as much as we need to assess the problem and think about it critically, I think we need to spend just as much time thinking critically about the solutions to it and the unintended consequences that poorly thought out, however well-intentioned solutions could potentially be, often for the people that we're most trying to help.
Thank you very much. Eric, Rachel, really insightful and informative. Thank you. I guess you guys have a deadline this evening, 8 o'clock, is it?
Yeah, our law school's class calendar does not respect 9 to 5, so we both had a makeup schedule.
Okay. So then I'm actually now that everybody has made a statement, I had prepared some questions, but I think we'll probably end up feeding off each other. But I did want to toss a question out there that before Eric and Rachel leave. And I might be wrong on this, and you can just say, no, you're wrong, and that'll be the answer. But it seems to me that the January 6th rioters are legally guilty or technically guilty of acts of both sedition and insurrection.
Oh my
And so I'm
God.
wondering,
Based on
and this
what?
is also for the whole group, if that's they actually are, should they be charged with both crimes, and should those charges be extended to the former president as well?
I'm surprised they
if that's
didn't
even
say that they
possible.
were guilty of treason.
That's the question.
So
I wonder how
the
burned
word
these people are that
sedition
Trump never got
doesn't
charged.
have a direct analog in the federal criminal code.
I kind of want to email like several of the people on this panel, maybe even all the people on this panel, and I kind of want to email them and ask them, like, now that, like, 2 years ago you made a statement saying they were all guilty of insurrection and sedition. So how do you feel about the fact that the January 6th committee canceled their subpoena of Donald Trump, and he will probably never face justice for his crimes against humanity? I really do want to email them and ask them that and just see what they say.
It's a word that we all know. The closest that there is this crime called a seditious conspiracy, which is, and let me pull it up here, 2 or more people conspiring to overthrow, put down, or destroy by force the government of the United States, or to levy war against it, or it's a very long statute. And so are the rioters, the insurrectionists, whatever term we use, are they guilty of that statute? I think that it would depend on each individual rioter and why they were there, right? So if they showed up because they thought that Nancy Pelosi was trafficking children and they were there to save the kids, then maybe they're not guilty of seditious conspiracy. But if they showed up to prevent the transition
He just
to
defended QAnon.
President Biden, then that's a closer call. So this is a really good question because it highlights the fact that the law doesn't reflect what we understand crimes to be, and the language that we use when talking about so-and-so has done this. Like incitement is another word that has been thrown around, which has very technical legal definitions that doesn't always correspond to how people use it. So I hope that answers at least the first part, and I'll let Rachel take the second.
So I take it the second part of your question was about any potential liability for former President Trump. So then this
or the insurrectionists.
Nicely of what Eric was just getting into. Incitement is a very particular term. It's well defined in First Amendment law, and it is a very, very high bar to meet. Again, you would have to have, a shared intent and understood very narrowly between President Trump and what he was saying prior to the riot and the intent of, each individual protester who ended up inside of the Capitol building. So it's a very difficult link. First Amendment law makes it really, really hard. Incitement to violence is a very, very difficult standard, and it's certainly far from clear that the way that the media and other public commentators and politicians have sort of colloquially been saying President Trump incited this, that's not how it translates necessarily into law or how a court would view incitement. So again, it's not clear and probably a very difficult case to make.
But the one thing that I will say to that is that that's specific to President Trump, and even if it's not legal, the heightened social protections that he has as president. I'd say for incitement for other people who participated in the January 6th event, it's a much easier case to make because they said things on Facebook Live or on Instagram like, let's go to the Capitol, bring your guns. And no matter what how people interpret what
No,
President
they
Trump
didn't.
said. He didn't use
Who said
quite
that?
explicit language. And so he is always going to be a special case by virtue of his position and his reflection of society. The people who don't have constitutional positions within the U.S. government.
Did anyone
are a
actually
much
say
easier
that?
target for the government.
Thank you. Okay. I don't know if anybody else wanted to jump in on that or leave it to the legal experts. Probably. So this is actually one, I can't remember which talk I kind of started thinking about. This is probably Luke's actually because of the political side of it. But and I think this will appeal to a broader audience. How do you all think that nativist appeals have made strange bedfellows into the same voting block? That is, groups like neo-Nazis or Proud Boys in the same voting block as evangelical Christians or even people who consider themselves to be social conservatives. Anybody who wants to jump in, unmute.
Well, and these are the people who literally write the history books, right? Isn't that scary?
So, having actually done some research in this area, I think I'll
In
start.
in
and
my
Luke can,
closet, I did some
back up, as
copious
well as I imagine
research in
he's
this area that didn't
also
involve
worked on
talking to
it.
anyone who was
So,
there.
with a lot of these groups, a lot of it comes from the specific group-oriented understanding of who counts as American. So
Who do you
for
think they
Proud
think
Boys
count
and
as
nativists,
American?
it's a particular white
No.
view of American past and
No.
American present.
Wrong.
And for them, ideally American future.
Wrong.
It gets a little more complicated when you get into sort of right-wing Christianity, but there is a lot of connection there as well. And
Well,
we
but
hear it
who,
in the
Peter?
echoes of
Like, I'm
We're a
honestly
Christian nation,
asking
we're
because I
funding.
feel like if someone had actually said that, that would have been plastered all over the news. I'm not saying no one said that. Didn't Enrique Tarrio do something stupid where he had like magazines or something he wasn't supposed to have? Like, they do this stupid shit all the time. So I'm not saying that, but if someone had actually said, bring your guns, kids, like, it would have been plastered all over the place. I just don't remember that happening. Maybe it did. It's been a couple of years, but I don't remember that.
Christian principles, and we were meant to be a Christian nation, something that historically cannot be actually supported by the record, and there's a lot of issues with those claims. But you can find within this root of narrowly defining us. And to go back to comments that Peter made earlier in his opening remarks, it's this question of the other, like, who is us, who is the other? So it's easy to start to see how these groups can come together, but underlying all of this, even if the specific definition of who we are differs across these groups, is this broader status anxiety and the loss of social condition. So being aware of either real or perceived loss of position in society and loss of power and concern for where we're going. Add in a media empire that has been feeding this narrative for decades, and you get groups that already narrowly prescribe only some as American, very much worried about what they see as the direction of the country, combined with additional concerns over what their relative position will be. And all of this makes for surprisingly not so much strange bedfellows, but rather sensical bedfellows.
This guy has
where
no
you
idea what
see
he's
the
talking
people
about.
who are willing to fight the fight with you and stand up for the things that you want and push back against a lot of these things. So we see it in reactions to the Me Too
The pink
movement.
hair
We see
dye
it
has
in
gotten to
reactions
his
to
head.
Black Lives Matter. We see it in a lot of the claims that supporters of Trump said early and often, that he doesn't watch his words. He says it like it is. He speaks like us.
Yo,
so
this is true.
Unwilling.
This is real. This is real. They closed down everything. And listen, man, so this actually was even a problem before January 6th. Because I remember this was a problem at the Million MAGA March right after the election, where they had closed down all the restaurants, and we could find, like, I remember we walked for like probably over a mile before we found a place where we could eat because nothing was open. And so I don't think I even I didn't eat outside on like in any restaurant outdoors on January 6th. I literally, the only options I had were to DoorDash food to my hotel room. And that was like the whole time because everything was shut down.
Intentional unwillingness to sort of quote unquote, engage in political correctness really allows for that appeal to hit a certain subset of groups that leads to what from the outside looks like weird alliances, but that actually make a lot more sense. And you can also see it in like the deeper roots of the Christian right becoming political in the United States, where the initial fight was over integration of schools. That then created a lot of the groundwork for these groups that were ready and active to mobilize when later things happened, like the sexual revolution in the 60s and broader cultural changes that really came to a
I
head
had
when
a
the
really
court
great
ruled
pasta in my hotel room that night, I'll
Roe
tell you
versus
what.
Wade. So a lot of that early activism was
pasta,
built on the prior activism
carbs,
of concern over
comfort
private
food.
schools and the closing down of segregated institutions.
Feel free to unmute and jump in.
Well, I'm just thinking about what Dan's been
Robert
saying,
also
and
has
I'm thinking of a lot
bookcases.
of other things that have been popping up frequently. I think one of the things that I find fascinating about this particular moment is there's always been a strain of messianic language in United States political or popular rhetoric, but I see it more and more. Just at the moment, I see it as a kind of.
Is he saying the political right are Masons?
Everything from the, these are the end times. Trump is part of the second coming. This is the through the usual world government black helicopter lunacy. But there's a common thread of things are coming to a head and something significant is happening and somebody significant is happening. That seems to be, we've been waiting for this. It's something you hear an awful lot. And that messianic thread is something that I've not seen as coherently in quite a long time.
Wouldn't that mean that Trump is like the second coming?
So I'd like to weigh in as well.
Oh God, here we go.
Appreciate the insightful.
Look at the dramatic taking off of the glasses.
Dr. and Dr. Halliday have provided to your question, Dr.
I can't see if I do that.
When I think about this question on nativism, I think about the monograph that I'm working on, which really looks at African American electoral and protest activism in Philadelphia from the abolition era to the Black Lives Matter movement today. And when I think about the types of political violence that has occurred in this northern city, that has this sort of ironic, this type of ironic.
This is awful. His voice reminds me of H.G. Tudor. I've been listening to H.G. Tudor again. I took a break for a while because he really got in my fucking head, and now I'm listening to him again. And this guy reminds me of H.G. Tudor with his air of superiority and the cadence at which he speaks. He just lacks the British accent to accompany it.
Identity being the most liberal city during the period, particularly during the antebellum period, but also being the most anti-Black racist city in the urban north, a city that is the geographic location of where the Constitution was framed, and a city that allowed nativists to beat up, kill, and burn community, wanted to discourage any interracial alliances with abolitionists. The threat was specifically about displacement. Displacement, very important threat that that exists across the arc of history in this one city. You can trace fear of displacement in the abolition era to the rise of a police commissioner as mayor in the city of Philadelphia. And I'm talking about Frank Rizzo, a person who had not completed high school, but who had been endorsed by the then Democratic mayor, James Tate, who also was leader of the Democratic Party. And he did it because he feared that if Democrats did not embrace the move to the right, Republicans would seize control.
Is that
of
true,
the city
Barb?
of
Does he
Philadelphia,
really?
and Republicans
Bot,
had
go
ruled
find his
Philadelphia
Twitter.
for 67
Bot,
years, from the end
go.
of the Civil War
Unleash.
to 1951. To preserve the Democratic in this mixture between institutionalists and progressives became dominated by essentially an anti-establishment mayor who had no hesitations on using violence. He was supported by an overwhelming blue-collar white ethnic majority because of two reasons. One, as one of them, right? They said he is one of us. He's a South Philadelphia guy, right? Secondly, he is going to keep all of these folks out of our neighborhoods, Blacks and Puerto Ricans. He's going to keep them all out of our neighborhoods. And the third reason was largely a rebellion against liberalism, because liberal policies had ceased to pay the dividends that they wanted. Liberalism was now helping those who were dispossessed. And this question,
Oh God, Bot found him.
about is a lift up for someone, does that translate into a detraction or a takeaway from somebody else, right? That
he only
tension
has 300 followers.
in 1970s Philadelphia, from 1970 to 1983, right, was a major tension. And you can draw a direct line to the political violence that ruled Philadelphia during the days of abolition and the period following Reconstruction. So I do think that Dr. Cash put us on the right plane when she started talking about the other. And what does it mean when privilege is perceived to be owned and not shared? Because in truth, for any of us to advance, it requires some degree of sacrifice. I keep going back to focusing our attention on half of the world's population, women. Half of the world's population, women, right? As a uncle of nieces, as someone who has great admiration for all of the women in his family, I find it absolutely unacceptable that their labor is not valued as much as that of men, that it is not valued as much as that of white men. To remain silent perpetuates the very problems that we are dealing with right now. But in order for that equity that Dr. Cash so eloquently talked about to occur, it's going to require a sacrifice. It's going to require specifically white men who are going to be willing to make that sacrifice. And history says,
and this is the problem. And this is why men are transing themselves, because they're convinced that the world is against them because of statements like
that we are talking about. And it doesn't have to be political violence, folks. It can be structural violence. It can be in the form of policies.
What policies?
We have gotten to a point where we
give me a specific
sensitize
policy.
our eyes to the burning buildings.
Give me one policy.
Equally as heinous is the invisible violence that exists within the policies themselves.
What policy?
And if we are not as sensitive
What policy?
to the
He's not going to
invisible
answer this.
violence.
I'm talking like
If
he
we
can hear
don't
me.
make that which is invisible visible through these types of ongoing conversations. So the very question that you set us on, Dr. Whitner, how do we deal with these issues of nativist appeals, continues to move forward, because at the end of it, it has to do with who has the right to have access to power and resources in this country. And what does it mean to share that with the other? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. Very powerful.
Yes, very powerful,
anybody
stunning and
else
brave and beautiful.
Jumping in, I don't need to moderate this part. You guys should just jump. Kat, just unmute yourself and go for it.
Take off your mask.
No, I was waving at somebody who was coming into the
Okay. Sorry.
One thing that I've been really intrigued in terms of the questions and what I'm hearing, and I'm trying to sort out in my brain, is how to parse the proximate causes of what happened in the insurrection with these larger structural forces that I think we all completely agree are deeply problematic.
All right, guys, I've just finished off my beer, but the thing is, it really messed up my glass. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to let this video play for a second. Talk amongst yourselves. Let me know if anything important happens. I'm just going to go clean out my cup real quick because I want another beer because we still got an hour and 20 minutes to go in this presentation, and I need more libations to maintain my sanity. So I'm going to let this play. I'm going to split for like 2 seconds. I'm going to go clean my glass, and I'll be right back. Please mount that like button if you haven't already. Enjoy the show. I'll be back soon.
And for me, I have to say that I think a really important consideration in regards to what happened at the insurrection were the individual choices made by Donald Trump. And maybe that's because I tend to focus on contemporary American politics, sure. But I do think if this particular individual didn't conduct himself in the way he did, in terms of particularly denying that he lost re-election, in terms of providing more lies and misleading statements than any president we have had in the modern era, at least, when these things have been tracked more empirically. I'm not convinced we would definitely have had the insurrection. If Trump conceded, that transition month would have looked differently. Now, that's not at all to suggest that all these problems that we've identified should not have a bright light shined on them and be discussed. But the reason I bring this up is because when I think about the question that Dr. Cash and others have raised is how do we make sense of the past and what happened and move forward in a more productive direction? For me, I think of self-interest. And this has been a historic theme in American politics, going back to the Federalist Papers and how our system of government was created. And I think it's just as relevant and impactful in making sense, as Dr. Tangarina pointed out, how can people who were terrorized by the insurrection vote the way they did? And I think it comes down to perceptions of self-interest. And for me,
we're bringing out the 10%. We're doing the peanut butter cup.
Donald Trump's individual choices from a contemporary political perspective is that political parties failed to control Donald Trump, and they couldn't. And typically these fringe candidates who amplify these fringe
You
voices,
wanted the
like
Republican Party to control Donald Trump? Are you shitting me?
Neo-Nazis and Proud Boys, they get weeded out through a political party process, particularly when it comes to the elite level. I'm not saying they don't exist locally throughout the country and have an impact. For sure they do, but they usually don't get to the level that Donald Trump did. Just to punctuate that, when he ran and declared his candidacy, major news organizations didn't know whether to put it on the entertainment page or put it on the news page. And
well, that's
I think what happened was, in part, Donald Trump came in with a huge bait.
Breaking news. Hang on. Oh my God. Hang on. This beer is incredible. This is incredible. I don't know how to... This tastes like a peanut butter cup. It does. It tastes like a peanut butter cup. This is a 10% peanut butter cup stout. It's so good. This is the Southern Tier Peanut Butter Cup Imperial Stout. It literally tastes like a peanut butter cup. I love peanut butter stouts, and this is probably one of the best peanut butter stouts I have. Oh my god. And the smell, like it you can, it wafts. You can smell pure peanut butter coming off of this thing. This whole stream is worthwhile now. It is. Let me know if you're drinking anything fun in the chat. Let's keep going.
From his reality TV experience, where he created a certain reality about who he was as a business person and how he conducted himself, and sold that to the American people in regards to how to release a section of the
This guy's
population that would
obsessed
be
with Donald
perceived
Trump,
as
you can tell.
beneficial. And so, you know, when we think about, again, particularly from a political science perspective, what to do next or how to make sense of what has happened, I think Donald Trump personifies the perspective, the ends justify the means. And
he kind of does, honestly.
Until we figure
Luke
out
Perry's
how
right about
to
that.
either respond to that by force, because I do think violence has had a positive.
Wait! Luke Perry just advocated for political violence? Luke Perry was basically just like, if the political parties can't control Trump, we need to respond with force. But it's okay for Luke Perry because, you know, he's an academic, so he's allowed to do that.
Piece in the American story as well, in terms of the revolution, in terms of civil rights, in terms of Reconstruction, and so on.
Oh, that sounds
but
good,
obviously,
Sin.
you know, that's not ideal. Peaceful social movements are another way to think about major social change. Or you have to change the incentive structure, where people like Donald Trump or politicians of either party are not able to benefit, or at least think they're going to benefit, by completely denying reality. And that's
Donald Trump's not the one denying reality,
puzzle
bro.
to
He's not the one
unfold,
denying reality.
but one that I think is important, because
You, the political science professor, are denying
in
reality.
the self-interest of people to lie and distort reality for their own game, and have the perspective that I would characterize it as the ends justify the means. It's going to be difficult to, I think,
Isn't there
use the
a
history of what
leftist
we've talked about in a meaningful
organization
way to move
called
forward,
The Ends Justify the
productively.
Means, or BAM, by any means necessary?
Dr. Blue A, please jump in.
Hi there. Good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Where's she?
All right. Excellent.
Oh, there she
well,
is.
I have just truly valued every talk in the series.
Wait, no, really, where is she? Is she on the screen?
Listening after the fact on most occasions. My schedule
She's not on
hasn't
the
allowed
screen.
me to be live, but I am following with my students in a class of mine this semester the talks, and we're discussing them in the senior seminar, and really trying to apply sociological and anthropological perspectives and other things to our understanding of the talk. So thank you very much for running the series and for allowing us this opportunity to engage with a larger campus community, both active students and alumni and faculty and staff as well.
And us, don't forget us.
The issue of self-interest, as Dr. Perry was talking about and Dr. Taglarina brought up in his earlier remarks, is one that I've been grappling with recently. And in my class this week, we were trying to talk about, and I guess my overarching question at this point is, how do we take stock of this series in light of the acquittal of former President Donald Trump? How do we take stock of
Oh,
what
that's
you all
right.
have
He got
shared
acquitted from
so
impeachment.
eloquently,
I bet they were feeling good
in light
about
of
that.
recent events that the acquittal happened. And it goes back to this idea of how, and I realize there's other avenues potentially to hold former President Trump accountable, but how could the people who, voted against the impeachment do so when their own lives and the lives of others around them were at stake. Their lives were in danger on January 6th. And it goes back to, I think Luke Perry hit it directly.
I love how they all
idea
call
of
him Luke Perry.
self-interest and thinking of upcoming elections or how they'll be perceived by their party and
Look
so
at
on.
Laura with an
So,
H, listening so faithfully.
This is a real key question, this idea of how did the people vote in the way they did when their lives were at stake and those around them were at stake. It was such a tense, dangerous situation, as Dr. Harris pointed out in his earlier remarks, quoting from or relaying to us the BuzzFeed article. So this idea of self-interest, how did it go down the way it went down in the sense of the acquittal when people's lives are at stake? How do we take stock of the talks in this series because of the recent acquittal? And I'll stop there for now, but I have some other remarks I hope we get to later on. Thank you.
So I'd like to jump in response to Dr. Bray's question. And this is really just going to respond or provide a sort of ignition. Colleagues will weigh in as well. Historians always look for moments of flux in history when the hegemony of institutions and norms become fluid. And we are certainly living through one of those moments right now. I don't think that anyone expected that 67 senators, 17 Republicans were going to find Donald Trump guilty. But I do think that this is a very important question that Dr. Blake puts before us, because many of the folk with whom I've spoken have raised the question, what does this mean when it comes to issues of accountability? Does it mean that someone with privilege can do the unthinkable and get away with it by saying what we saw is not what we saw? And I think that the answer to that is the realization that this has created a moment for having an ongoing conversation. And the key here is an ongoing conversation. As we are having this talk right now, there is a strong probability that a 9/11 type commission will emerge. And they're going to have a serious amount of power, hopefully subpoena power, to raise a tremendous amount of questions that speak to exactly what you have raised, Dr. Brooke. And they're going to delve deeply into areas that will hopefully produce a document that will be very important to our history, but very important to each and every one of us as academics who are going to take from that document and come into our classrooms. We're going to teach on it. We're going to write studies on it. We're going to be speaking to the public on it, because the impeachment trial is not the beginning or the ending of accountability. In fact, accountability is quite elastic here. It's very elastic, and I think Dr. Perry talked about that earlier. Now, I didn't necessarily believe that that the Republican Party was going to stretch back to the types of norms that reflect a type of rational governance, right? That was the reason I talked about what was happening with many of the Republicans who voted to convict, right? These folks are being censored. Have this type of
Mitt Romney was censored. Okay.
That is growing within state and local parties, right? That's the reason I brought that into view. However, the most important part here is to recognize that
you know who the real victim of January 6th is. Mittens Romney.
It actually has many vehicles that it can ultimately unfold. And I think that what we're starting to see is how the process of accountability, not merely in criminal courts, but in the types of questions that are going to be answered in the 9/11 type commission, in the types of ways in which the public is going to hold those accountable for what happened, and the ways that which we as academics are going to continue to keep this conversation going. It challenges us to rethink needs. And then by rethinking the way what accountability means, we can become agents of pushing a redefinition of accountability, and therefore become the change that we envision. And I'll stop there so that
We
my other
must
colleagues can weigh
become
in.
the change in the
I'm going to actually
political
jump in
landscape.
for a moment. I want to go back to actually something that Dr. Tagliarina said. And it's something I've been thinking about for a while. And it just seems that, you know, I mean, Trump's got this populist message that's been almost, it's been so simplistic and almost childlike in his rejection of anything that you'd remotely consider civil, with name calling, imitating or mocking people, things like that. That it seems to have struck a chord with people who've got kind of this resentment for government, you know, and somehow feel threatened, whether it's economically threatened, somehow losing their position, a tenuous position of even privilege in society, based on the fact that they're simply white. That it's, you know, he kind of laid that to bear. It's almost like, you know, we've had this wound of hate that's been festering underneath the bandage for probably since the Civil War and then some, that Trump succeeded in tearing off and just letting it all come out, which is really a disgusting metaphor. I apologize. But, you know, we started this, you know, when I started this, the series, I didn't, you know, this was about insurrection and protest. But one of the things, and this is now kind of bringing it out more, and I apologize for rambling, but is that, you know, this, as I said, it was about democracy, insurrection, protest. Where are the lines? But what's become absolutely clear is that all of these concepts, and especially democracy, are inexplicably tied to race and ethnicity in this country.
Everything is racist.
You know, and this is for everybody.
Someone really needs to do that song. Why haven't they made an Everything is Racist song yet?
Do we think that's been lost on the general public? Or is it, you know,
Everything is racist.
Push it off to the side and shove it under the rug, maybe? I don't know.
That's definitely not going to get me in trouble, by the way.
Peter, go ahead.
Well, I think it's not the fact that the way that you phrase it, democracy is tied to race, is certainly, again, a historical reality of democracy as well too. Is that if we look back to the Greek origins of democracy, democracy was not about all-inclusive, everyone gets a say at all. It was this very small group of people get a say, and everyone else has to deal with it and its repercussions. And that's
hence the problem with democracy, Peter. Thank you.
Has always been, how do you make it look inclusive while making it as exclusive at the same time? And so once again, that, you know, brings up, you know, this idea that America is just part of that larger trend as well too, in regards to our own approach to democracy, is that it's a nice sounding word, but in reality, it's never been about inclusiveness. Always been about exclusion.
Yeah. Just unmute and jump in.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in short, we're talking about a constituency that sees wearing a mask in the midst of a pandemic as an infringement of rights.
You are people who think that racism is a public health crisis.
Where do we even begin to go with that? To put that in the same sentence as democracy, right? Because you can even roll that back if you want to stick with, you know, sort of Enlightenment, Lockean theory and all of that. That's not what John Locke was saying. He was, right? I mean, he talks about how essentially we have to give up a little bit of our freedom.
Oh, there is one. Thank you, James Jones.
Protection from our government, to protect us. And so where are the roots of that thinking.
Some of us don't want the government to protect us,
which
Sherry.
incredibly has
Some of us
really,
don't believe in the government's ability to protect us at
you
all.
know, just
Some of us believe we can protect ourselves.
let's say a strong tendency to be wrapped up with fundamentalist Christianity.
Oh yeah, I'm a fundamentalist Christian.
Not in all
sure.
cases.
Yeah.
Certainly not among, you know, in Black churches, for example, even Black evangelical churches who, you know, the discussion of fundamentalism or evangelicalism tends to focus on a certain demographic, which is white, right? So I'm not saying across the board, but there's an element that you know, wraps up that sense of infringement, even with religious values. On a certain level, it's mind-boggling, right? And so the reaction is wanting to sort of shake somebody into the reality of, or our reality of what democracy is about. But of course, they have not an argument, but I would say an assertion and an attitude that pushes back against that, which I think Trump's appeal very much sits in that space. That is not really an ideology, but it's an attitude. I think it even came out here in these discussions about a brand. It might have been Dr. Harris who talked about Trump in terms of a brand, or I could be getting that wrong, who said that. There's not really anything that you can argue with there. And one of the things we know is that when you construct an argument, it has to be something that can be debatable. It has to be based upon fact. And in large part, we're not really confronting that. That's not what we're up against. So how do you overcome that sort of set of attitudes? It's a very difficult question.
Sherry is gone.
Well,
Sherry will
I
never
really
be
could not agree
will never
more,
be found
Dr.
again.
Cash, as you were thinking, as you were talking, I kept thinking
I wonder if
about
Sherry has a
the
Twitter.
justification for lynching. It
What?
just kept going over and over in my mind.
These are the same people that think that
Today,
Mike
I had
Pence
the
was going to be
privilege
hung at the
of,
Capitol.
delivering a talk on the World War II origins of the Black Lives Matter movement to the U.S. Department of Education. And I was asked this question.
Wait, what? What did he just say? He gave a lecture about the World War II origins of the Black Lives Matter movement through the Department of Education. Hang on. Okay, before we make fun of him, is anyone at all surprised that Clemmy here wants to argue that the origin of the Black Lives Matter movement was the Department of fucking Education? This is actually, before we mock, this is actually a helpful piece of information. And in fact, I kind of want to look this talk up. How did Black Lives Matter develop through the Department of Education? Hang on, let me just listen to that again.
And in large part, we're not really confronting that. That's not what we're up against. So
shush, Sherry.
Counts for what?
Not interested in you, Sherry.
The justification for lynching. It just kept going over and over in my mind. Today, I had the privilege of delivering a talk on the World War II origins of the Black Lives Matter movement to the U.S. Department of Education. And I was asked this question. I was asked the question, how do you explain what occurred in Black Wall Street, the Greenwood section of Tulsa, Oklahoma? What accounts for why a white mob destroyed this very productive, segregated section of Greenwood of Oklahoma in 1921? And of course, the trigger for it was that a young Black man, while working as a elevator operator, attacked a young white woman. Well, there's no evidence of that at all. but it was enough to bring a white mob angrily into the Greenwood section, massacre more than 300 people, burn down Black homes, Black businesses. It was a thriving Black middle class community. And ultimately, no one has accounted for to this very day. The question was about why has that particular event remained so silent in our discussions of history, right? We're talking about erasure, right? What happens when we don't talk about something? It becomes marginalized and then ultimately erased from the consciousness. But the reality here was that there was no rational justification for this action. It was about the realization of power, who had it and who did not, and how it could be wielded in an extra legal capacity without fear of any repercussion whatsoever. When I talk about Johnson's comments excusing the actions of the insurrectionists, and yes, I see them as insurrectionists, he is ultimately saying there's no way these folks could be accountable of the acts that we all saw them engage in. But there's no doubt whatsoever that there was nothing rational about the way they responded to an outright lie. And all of us as academics, all of us as critical watchers realize
Critical watchers.
that
Interesting
we
choice
living
of
in an
words,
era
Clemmy.
where truth had become secondary to alternative truth. And that you could fabricate something and say that it is true, right? This was the core of Dr. D. Simone's talk, right? How propaganda led to the rise of the Third Reich. And so in the hunt for the response to your question, Dr. Whitney, I think that we have to recognize that there isn't always a rational answer to it. It is about recognizing how the irrational can appeal to the neurotic, to those who are very anxious about something that they are going to lose, and how they will grab onto that and use that as justification for the unthinkable. Thank you.
If I could jump in, I completely agree with the sense of loss being a prominent theme in understanding behavior here. I'd like to touch on a couple of things that were mentioned. First, when we think about mask wearing in the Republican Party, 73% of Republicans per recent Pew survey do not think it's a problem to wear a mask. 27% do, so you can argue that's large. Compare that to Democrats, 90% don't think it's a problem to wear a mask in the context of the pandemic. 10% do. So it's a 17-point difference, and vast majorities of both party members per reputable public opinion studies, assuming we look at Pew that way, hold that view. Why do I bring that up? Just because I have no interest in defending people who are in positions of power to make meaningful change in the wake of the insurrection and failed to do so. Let me make that absolutely clear. As a scholar, at the same time, though, I'm very interested in understanding from a psychological perspective why people made the decisions they did. And I think something I've observed for the last 4 years, particularly as I've ventured into covering national politics, is that there's a tendency for judgments on conservatives to be influenced by conceptions of normative conceptions about what people think are right. And that's understandable. I also have no problems with normative arguments and criticisms of both parties. But part of me is also kind of reluctant to say this, but also a bit concerned that that can complicate empirical assessment of political behavior by prominent Republicans through the Trump era, and particularly around this moment. So to address Dr. Bluet's question, and this has come up before, I mentioned self-interest. Let me take it a step forward. Why did Republicans senators not vote to convict? Compartmentalization, right? This is a lens of analysis in political science to understand how, from a psychological perspective, people can set aside, put in a compartment, really bad things about people and still accept and or support other things they do that they think are good. So I think the challenge as we wrestle with this is I try to put myself in that position. If I literally was in a situation where someone, including the president, put my immediate life in danger, and my whole career was wrapped up to some degree with this person, or at least with this team that we both belong to, I can understand, and I would even argue, perhaps to differ with some of my colleagues, that it would be rational to say that I'm going to perceive my self-interest in a way that even though Trump is a jerk, I don't like him, I don't like what he did, right? My career, my livelihood, my power, my influence, the millions of dollars I have access to, I'm not going to risk all that. And so, by all means, those people should.
He basically sounded like your average Republican just then.
And I
I'm not
understand
gonna
the
lie.
perspective that it should be
He
a vote
really
of
did.
conscience and there's much larger concerns at stake here. Okay, but congressional scholarship would say that being reelected is the primary assumption that those scholars use to understand congressional behavior. And I think you can make an argument as to how that makes sense. Now, again, I don't agree with that argument, but I wanted to share that as we try to make sense of this. And the last thing I'd like to touch on is in terms of Dr. Whitner and sort of Trump amplifying or resurrecting latent attitudes. I think one thing that we haven't mentioned is that Trump's public communication, which is something I've researched, is conservative talk radio. It's something that's been around since the 1980s. And he's taken that, and it's appropriate to talk about when Rush Limbaugh has died. He's taken that, and that's a person he awarded the Congressional Medal of Freedom in a controversial move. He's taken that and used that as a way to, again, mobilize political support for partisan and personal gain.
Rush Limbaugh was so cute when he got that award. I don't even like Rush Limbaugh, and I would still say that.
Compartmentalization is not
I thought it was really cute
to Republicans in this moment. I'm very careful in trying
Rush
to draw
Limbaugh was obviously very moved.
But there have been other presidents who are Democrats who have lied about doing horrible things under oath. Bill Clinton's a prominent example. Again, not the same. But why did Bill Clinton get more popular when he was being impeached? Because people said, well, that's personal, unethical, or moral behavior, right? Having an inappropriate relationship with somebody that's the age of his daughter in the White House. I think the vast majority of the Americans, irrespective of the party, would say that's not good, right? But people could set that aside. He could get reelected. His popularity could go up. And again, I understand it's not the same, and you can draw a dichotomy between personal behavior and professional behavior. But I think it's a bit of the reality check as well in thinking about this issue of compartmentalization and how that's certainly not unique to Republicans, though that's certainly a prominent theme, I think, of trying to understand what's going on.
If I may be able to build off of what Dr. Perry said, I completely agree. Compartmentalization is not unique to Republicans, and it's certainly not even unique to this time. When we look at this through the long Black freedom struggle lens, we see how Blacks continued to support the Republican Party following Reconstruction, even though the Republican Party turned their back on Black civil rights. You might ask yourself the question, why? Why would Blacks who were being attacked in the city of Philadelphia continue to sing the praises of the Republican Party? And it had little to do with self-interest in that particular era. It had to do with making interest political support in order to policies that would bring about protections that in the city of Philadelphia.
The internet is racist. The internet is racist.
Leverage to form
They're all gonna pretend they heard everything he said.
I think I froze it.
Yeah,
You did, yeah.
you're gonna have to come back in on
Okay.
your phone again like you did last time.
All right. So let me simply conclude by saying that we should not look at this very narrowly because it is a very complex issue. And Dr. Perry is correct. We need to really situate why people make the decisions that they do. But I would dare say that it's not always personal, right? That there are larger interests that are at stake as well. That's what history tells us. Thank you.
I'd like to jump in here as well, pick up on some of these threads from Dr. Harris and Dr. Perry as well, and actually start by defending some Republicans. As
Mitch McConnell,
Dr. Harris
Mitch
mentioned
McConnell,
earlier,
Mitch
no one
McConnell,
expected
Mitch
17
McConnell.
Republicans to vote against Trump, but 7 did. That's not nothing, and
Mitch
it does
McConnell.
speak to something. So we've had 4 presidential impeachments. 2 of them were Trump. If we look at the first 2 presidential impeachments, none of the parties voted against their own president to remove at that point.
If I'm honest about it, man, I would really like to see Trump win in 2024. I don't think he will. I want to be very clear. I don't think he will. But man, just for people like this, just for people, and I know this stream was like 2 years ago, but I would love to see Trump win another term. Just not because I'm the biggest fan of Trump. I think some of the things Trump did is fine. I think he's probably learned a lot. I think he'd probably make very different decisions now than he did then. But wouldn't it be glorious? Wouldn't it be amazing? Trump needs to listen. Trump needs to start taking this presidential election seriously. John Bolton announced today. Why the fuck is John Bolton running for president? Who thought that was a good idea? That is a horrible idea. Trump needs to start taking this presidential race more seriously. Trump thinks he can phone it in and still get that nomination. There are a lot of Republicans that like DeSantis. DeSantis, by the way, is getting more and more statist for me every single day. Well, yeah, I think he probably, I mean, this might be true, Kurt. Just for the alone, I need Trump to get the nomination. I need Trump to take it more seriously than he's taking it. Just for the utter complaining and crying and the amount of lectures just like this that would be created for us to enjoy for the next couple of years, it might almost be worth it.
Mitt Romney bucked that trend the first time around, being the first person to in the Senate to vote against, or in terms of removal, the president of their own party. That moved up to 7 in the course of 1 year. Now, he was no longer president, and maybe that's a part of it, but I think it does speak to that there are more tensions that are happening here. And as we look at some of these numbers, especially poll numbers about Republicans, one of the things we need to keep in mind is as some parts, and it's not much, but as parts of the Republican Party grew more and more distasteful with Trump, they stopped calling themselves Republican. They might still vote that way, but what we see
No,
is
they
a
didn't.
drop
That's not
off
true.
of those who don't like Trump in the party, which leads to, by virtue of who's left, an increase in support for Trump.
They
so when we
should
see
leave the
things like
party.
that 55%
Like
say
little Adam.
they are willing to engage in violence to protect the American way of life, that's not necessarily reflective of all Republicans by virtue of what we're seeing with how people are aligning. But I do think in talking about compartmentalization and psychology, Professor Perry went in a really good direction, that there is a lot of work on political ideological differences and political psychology. And one of the, or I mean, there's a handful of things, but part of what we know is that people who identify as conservative and people who identify as liberal process information differently. and view things differently. Study after study has found that black and white moral thinking is far more prevalent in people who self-identify as conservatives.
I
Meaning
believe
they're
that.
more likely to see things in a right and wrong
I
sort of lens.
absolutely believe that.
And
yes.
if that gets filtered through a media that, or a president, if you want to just look at Trump directly, who keeps saying the election was stolen. Well, if the election was stolen and it was wrong, you have to act on that. The same thing with the conspiracy theories of, children in harm that keeps coming up. So it speaks to this. Add in that one of the other common findings is that there's much more authoritarian sympathies in people who self-identify as conservative. Now we start to get this
No, I
mix
don't agree
that
with
can
that.
lead into
No,
embracing a figure like
no.
Trump.
I don't
And you
agree with
add in
that.
one of the
Both
third common
sides are equally
findings, and that's
authoritarian.
fear stimuli. Response to fear stimuli is stronger in conservatives. fMRI tests have found this, and this includes things like political stimuli, like, oh, look, people you don't like, but it also includes things like snakes, spiders, other sorts of things that have nothing to do with politics. Self-identified conservatives react much more strongly than self-identified liberals to fear. So fear and authoritarianism and a black and white sort of perspective on the world, combined with racial animosity and these other factors, really does create sort of the ideal brew for someone like Trump to come in and say, they stole the election from me, they stole it from you, you need to fight like hell. And that can mean anything, which is sort of the benefit of his defense. But in speaking to some of the points that Dr. Cash brought up, the other thing is people, regardless of political ideology, really don't respond well to rational arguments. It turns out in multiple studies, when you present people with evidence that their beliefs are wrong, they're more likely to believe what they believed before. Which, in answer to the question from Dr. Blue that started all of this, so what do we do? To some extent, we have to do the hard work of emotion and empathy and reaching out and talking to people. And we can present evidence, but if we are only presenting evidence, it's not going to work. Because underlying all of this is, I'll tell through a little bit of story. So I'm reminded of one of my grad seminars on American political ideology. And one of the grand questions throughout as we looked across time is there an American ideology? And
shut the fuck up, bot.
To sum it up in the words of one of my really astute grad colleagues, if there's an American ideology, it's that everyone else is wrong and you can't tell me what to do. Sort of from the people that came over for either making money purposes, religious purposes, or any of those things, to fighting the king.
Tell me that's
things
not
that
real.
we saw as tyrannical, to everything else. So much is wrapped up in this sort of ethos of, I know what's best for me. I mean, we ended up with federalism literally because this is
Jennifer, that's not real.
There, which means these trends are always gonna make it hard. And it's also what emphasizes and comes back to what I said in my opening remarks, of these tensions between these great principles of equality and the political reality that we don't like equality in a lot of ways, or we like equality for people that are like us in some way, but not like those other people, whoever it is. And
y'all
it's
feel the same
across
way,
time as to what that
please.
group is, which creates a lot of problem when it comes to accountability, which goes back to what Dr. Harris was saying
before. It's
before.
not your job to hold people accountable. You're academics. Go read a fucking book.
Everything he said about impeachment not being the end-all be-all of accountability. And there are other ways, and there should be a 9/11 style commission and all of these things. But I also wonder if we've ever had meaningful accountability as a country. Dr. Whitner at the start in his opening remarks mentioned that, well, good thing we won the war with our firebombing. Otherwise, that would have been war crimes. And yeah, by most definitions of war crimes, we've committed a bunch. But if you come out on the winning side, or at least strong enough to enforce things, you don't have to face it. Trump twice now has been impeached, but not held to account in the Senate. We've never held a president to account in the Senate. And as Professor Perry mentioned earlier, Clinton got more popular during that whole process, which creates this very real issue is if we don't have real accountability mechanisms. And I forget who said it, but someone said it recently, that the fear, I think it was Rankin, but the fear isn't that Trump will become president again. The fear is that he will run again and lose again and claim that the election was stolen again. And that's where, if the Republican Party or American general, but really given what we know about in-group dynamics, it has to come from the Republican Party. If they don't hold him to account, and based on the fact they couldn't stop him from running in the first place, there's no reason to expect they will, we're likely to be here again. And the really scary thing is,
I hope we are.
typically failed coups come before successful coups. And that's
Wouldn't that be
something we have
amazing?
to wrestle with. So how do we stop that from happening? I think
it would be amazing if next year for January 6th, I tried to convince the Libertarian Party to do it this year, but they wanted to do some anti-war protest next month. Fine, whatever. I think that one of these years, maybe next year for January 6th, like a whole bunch of people need to descend on Washington, D.C. And do you know what they need to do? They need to bring Guy Fawkes masks like V for Vendetta, and we need to recreate that final scene in V for Vendetta where everyone wearing a Guy Fawkes mask just peacefully approaches the Capitol and then just stands there looking at the Capitol, and that's all that happens. No fucking violence. None of that nonsense again. I can't do it again. I've already been interviewed by the FBI once. I don't want to be interviewed by the FBI again. But like, what if like hundreds of thousands of people just brought their Guy Fawkes masks and their black capes? Everyone just wore all black with a Guy Fawkes mask, and everyone just like marched up to the Capitol and stared at the Capitol and just stood there. Fuck, that would be amazing. That would be the performance art piece that I need in my life. But like the problem is we can't do it with just a couple people. We need to get like a lot of effing people, okay? A lot of effing people. Wouldn't that be incredible? Imagine the symbolism. Fucking MSNBC would lose their minds. Joy Reid's brain would explode on live television. Oh, I think I had an orgasm just thinking about it. Oh my God, that would be incredible.
It's going to find a way to come together that, unlike most of the ways we've done it historically as Americans, doesn't involve just turning a blind eye to what happened.
Thanks. Fascinating. I want to actually bring up a question from one of the students, and then Dr. DeSimone, you get to jump back in. But Tommy Morial asked a really good question. Do you think that addressing these issues with students at a young age could help prevent some of the problems in the future? And I think we actually just answered this one, or Dan just answered this one, or is it possible to change the minds of American adults? So.
Yeah, I was going to steal your moderator's rights. I was actually going to segue off what Dan was saying and bring that question in myself, because I'd been thinking about that. And I absolutely agree with what Dan is saying and what several others have said as well too. This idea of accountability and how do we move on and how do we go from there and how do we teach this kind of thing? And I've seen it constantly repeated over the last month. All these sycophants, all the people supporting Trump, all the flip-flopping Republicans, the Kevin McCarthys, things like that. The constant refrain is history will judge them. Well, yes, again, I'm a historian.
Oh,
I'm judging them
history will
already,
judge some.
like
I don't think.
And
Well,
history will judge them. But the other side is that history isn't going to truly judge them until generations from now. History judging them right now isn't going to do my kids any good. It's not going to do my, hopefully future grandkids any good. And because history proves that that's not how it works. Is that most of our condemnations of some of the biggest historical figures in history are found centuries, thousands of years later by some monk finding a book tucked behind other books. because the person who wrote that and wrote these condemnations didn't want to end up with their head on a pike. And that's the kind of sad reality. You know, speaking as a historian, that's the sad reality, is that we play up these great moments and we've heard the language. These, you know, again, Dr. Harris bringing in Ron Johnson. These are the real Americans that you saw marching on the Capitol. That we are seeing this back and forth fight over history right now. And I absolutely agree with Dr. Taggs that, you know, vigilance, to go back to what he said in his opening statement, vigilance is what we have to do, is that we can't turn a blind eye to this. And the attitude is that we can start making history judge the sycophants, the supporters, the guys with buffalo horns on their head, and things like that at this moment right now, by actively engaging with this and saying that's not supposed to be us. Unfortunately, it is us right now, but that's not supposed to be us. How can we make this grand American experiment actually work? Learning from what we just saw in our own eyes. And so teaching right now is the way to do it. Teaching the younger children, engaging with the adults who are willing to listen to evidence and things like that, and saying, do you see why this doesn't line up, or why this was potentially wrong, or why this was dangerous? What does it mean in 4 years if this all happens again? Because absolutely, that's another rule of history. A failed coup is the practice rehearsal for the real coup. So vigilance, I agree completely. That's the way to go. That's the way to address this. And so, yeah, absolutely, addressing these issues to students now is the way to do it. And that's from a young age on up. That's how you prevent the perversion of the history of saying, nope, those were the real Americans, the ones throwing down American flags, the ones carrying Confederate flags, the ones beating police officers with Blue Lives Matter flags. You can't say that those are the real Americans and just say, oh, well, what an idiot. You have to actively engage with it and have to cut that off at the pass.
Can I jump in here, David?
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, I was thinking about the second part of that question. I mean, how do you change the minds of adults? Can you change the minds of adults? How do you help them see the error of their ways? And I've been fascinated by some of the stories that have been out there about people who were either at the Capitol on January 6th, or very sympathetic to that, or at least involved in the QAnon area.
Tell us what stories you've heard, Robert. Not everyone was involved in QAnon. That's not true.
And there are increasing numbers of those out there, and usually it has nothing to do with rational arguments. Now, I'm a philosopher. I wish it had everything to do with rational arguments. I wish I could simply lay out
what
all
arguments
the
have
truth
you
and the
heard,
logic
Robert?
and the
Are you just making
postulates
shit
and everything
up?
else would flow from that. It doesn't. What tends to make people change their mind is some confrontation with a reality that they can't deny. That is beyond it even for them. So there's some really interesting stories about people for whom the tipping point was the assertion that on March 3rd, Trump would be reelected.
That's QAnon. That's not normal people, Robert.
Claim his rightful election back again. And other people have found other points. And I think the second thing to note about that is that
I don't know who needs to hear this, but most people who voted for Trump did not vote for Trump because of QAnon and did not support Trump because of QAnon. QAnon's a whole different thing. And I don't want no lecture being like there's Q in the Anons. I know what fucking QAnon is, okay? I understand the terminology. I understand that people who are in QAnon think I'm misusing it because there's Q and then there's the Anons. But not everyone who voted for Trump is involved in any of that shit. Don't ask, Tom. Don't do this to me. Don't do it. No. You know, I was thinking about this last night because we watched my stream from January 6th last night, and I remember like I did some subsequent streams like after that, and I was so pissed at the Q people. I remember those streams, and maybe I should go back and watch those at some point, but I remember doing them in which I was livid at the Q people. I was fucking livid at the Anons because I was like, you fucking idiots. with this conspiracy theory and this craziness and all of that. You are the ones that have caused all of this. I was livid at QAnon. And I think that being livid at QAnon followed me for several months in 2021, where I was just generally like, F you all.
Whole people do not change their minds in moments of duress.
Of course, QAnon was the
It's
feds.
not when
Of
you're
course,
on the,
it was.
yeah, in the middle of the insurrection, in the middle of the riot, in the middle of anything else that you change your mind. It's later. It's in calmer moments. And I think part of
Trust the
what
plan, everyone. Trust
we
the
have to
plan.
do as
Trust the
people
plan.
who are not
Where
going
we
to be,
go one,
I'm
we
not going
go
to be
all.
confronting anybody with cow horns on his head and all that stuff, because I don't move in those circles. But I do.
I
encounter
sadly
people
did
who
move in those
believe
circles. I knew
that,
who that guy was.
the end
I
times
knew
are
who the
upon us and
QAnon
Donald Trump
shaman
is the
was
harbinger
before
of
January
those.
6th.
And I need to make
I didn't need to
real
know that
the
information, but I
contradictions
knew
that
it
they themselves
nonetheless.
are tacitly acknowledging sometimes, and allow them space. And that's the tricky part. I mean, I really want to get in there and engage and feel like if I could just get more pugilistic and more effective in my arguments, things would happen. But you've got to allow people room to change, and you've got to give them space and the comfort to change. Because one of the things that you talked about already, Peter, and other people have as well, is the extent to which these actions are driven by fear. Fear of loss, fear of future potential loss, fear of lack of identity, fear of all sorts of things. People don't react well to fear. And if we're going to help Americans change their minds, we have to actually try and find space that is safe enough and comfortable enough for them to do it.
I'll jump in. I, as an educator, I agree education is very important. But having spent 20 years in rural America, living in Nebraska and Utah, if a PhD, perhaps who subscribes to a liberal ideology, comes to ranch country trying to educate idiot farmers, I'm being loose with my language. I know nobody said that directly.
He just called all farmers idiots? What a douchebag. I would like to try to see this guy do the work of a farmer for like one day. That slip right there tells you everything you need to know about these people. Farmers are some of the hardest working people in the world. The people on this call could never do what farmers do on a day-to-day basis. But that tells you how they see all. Look at Dr. Peter. He's like, yeah, farmers are idiots. Ah. Wow. Let's replay that, Tom J. Let's replay that again. Let's do that one more time.
I agree completely. That's the way to go. That's the way to address this. And so, yeah, absolutely, addressing these issues to students now is the way to do it. And that's from a young age on up. That's how you prevent the perversion of the history of saying, nope, those were the real Americans, the ones throwing down American flags, the ones carrying Confederate flags, the ones beating police officers with Blue Lives Matter flags. You can't say that those are the real Americans and just say, oh, well, what an idiot. You have to actively engage with it and have to cut that off at the pass.
Can I jump in here, David?
Wait, did I miss it?
Absolutely, yeah.
I was thinking about the second part of that.
Did I miss it? Hang on. Where did he go to the idiot farmer things?
To evidence. Vigilance. So you go back to behind.
Where did he speak up?
This was.
Hang on.
What an.
To that or flow from that. That is.
I feel like I missed it. What happened?
I feel like it's safe.
Living in Nebraska and
there
Utah.
It is. Found it.
The PhD who subscribes to a liberal ideology comes to ranch country trying to educate idiot farmers. I'm being loose with my language. I know nobody said that directly.
There it is.
That's not welcome. And as
No,
Tags was
you
saying, I
are
mean, I
not
think there's-
welcome,
There's different perspectives
Luke
on
Perry.
reality. So I'd like to point that out. I'd like to point out too that it seems like a lot of the conversation is sort of very focused on conservative efforts to categorize people as the other. I think particularly in this election cycle, Democrats embraced a somewhat similar narrative that, to use Joe Biden's words, this was a fight to the soul of America. And so there's a bit of the tit for tat rhetorically in regards to that. And you can trace similar currents back to Hillary Clinton talking about deplorables, Barack Obama from my home state, citing how rural conservatives in Southern Illinois cling to guns and religion. So I encourage people to consider, and I think this is a theme of what how Dr. Holliday was addressing this, think about how they approach these conversations, because they are difficult and they are sensitive. And I think it comes down to relationships. And so to answer the question directly, I think the best thing we can teach, particularly young people, is empathy. And there's a lot of psychological studies that are coming out now that is the best skill you can
You
teach
just
young
called
children.
farmers
I mentioned
idiots,
in
and
my
now
talk,
you're like, let's just
I
teach
have young
them
children. That's something that's very important to me.
empathy.
And when we think more about young
Those
adults,
idiot farmers just
travel
need to learn
to the extent that you can
empathy.
do that is important. Not self-segregating and surrounding yourselves, again, to the extent that you have mobility, you at least have the decisions over who you associate with. But if you continue to associate yourself with people that are just like you and just think like you, you're gonna have a hard time understanding people who are different than you. And unfortunately, we see trends nationally in America where people tend to work, tend to live, tend to marry people who are like them. And I get that. I've done some of that in my own life, but I've also done some other things. I've had encounters as an undergraduate student where I met somebody, we became friends, we were roommates, we're moving in together, Confederate flag goes up on the wall. I didn't see that coming. And I won't go into the whole story, but what happened from that point was a series of deep and meaningful conversations, research, travel, dialogue, talking about experiences that led to my friend who ended up being the best man in my wedding, getting to that point, and me getting to a very different point and trying to collectively get better and explore two very different views about that flag and what it meant. And then when I think of graduate school, I worked with a dissertation advisor who I think is one of the smartest people I've ever encountered. He had a completely different political ideology than I do. That's not common, but it was so beneficial for me. So these are some of the types of things I think about, particularly when we're talking about how to address these difficult conversations and help handle them, particularly when we think about young people.
So I'd like to build on that. I want to say that, Tommy, I think that you raised, as I put in the chat, an excellent set of questions. And I'd like to build on what Dr. Perry and others have said. Not only was Dr. Holliday right, you have to give people room, but the only way that this is going to get better in response to Dr. Whitner's question is by teaching empathy. Well, Tommy talked to us about young people versus old people. And I'm often reminded of what young people say when they take the Intro to Africana Studies course. They ask this question: why did it take us getting to your course before we got exposed to a diverse history? Why did it have to wait until this particular moment? And we chose this course because we heard other people say, yeah, you should take that course, right? And this is extremely important because we're trying to talk about the whole question of American exceptionalism, but the whole question of American exceptionalism is what's being taught in our local education system across the country. And it glorifies the very thing that we are putting holes in right now, right? And so folks like Tommy come to us with this already preconceived understanding that somehow there is something exceptional about being an American. And because we are preparing
Why does that
them
offend you
for
so
the global
greatly,
economy,
Clemmy?
and because neoliberalism is such a dominant ideology in higher education,
That means he's a Marxist.
we don't really have the space as historians and social sciences to do the work that Luke absolutely says we must do: teach empathy.
It's not your
Structurally, we are
fucking job to teach
constrained
empathy.
in our ability to do that. And not just in higher education, because as I said earlier, this seed starts.
Has anyone ever met a single professor or teacher or any of these things that when they taught empathy, it actually made you more empathetic? You cannot teach empathy. You can't teach empathy any more than you can teach happiness, or you can teach joy, or you can teach elation, or you can teach wonder. You cannot teach an emotion. It doesn't work. This is why social emotional learning is a complete and total fucking scam. You cannot teach people to feel things. That's why it's a feeling. If you don't feel it, you can't understand it. Empathy is a normal human emotion. Sadness is a normal human emotion. Joy is a normal human emotion. Anger is a normal human emotion. What you need to teach people is how to assess and understand the emotions that they are feeling at any given time. And the only way you can do that is by teaching people to look inward. They can't learn shit from you. You can teach people how to meditate. You can teach people how to use mindfulness techniques in order to feel, like in order to do assessments of how their body's feeling and use that as a way to assess how they're feeling intellectually in their brain, because what our body feels follows what our brain is feeling. You can do lots of techniques. But saying you need to be more empathetic, who even knows what that means? Can you even define that? What does empathy even mean? These people aren't empathetic. These people 2 sentences ago were calling farmers idiots. They don't know how to teach empathy. They only want to teach people to agree with them. How these people define empathy is agree with me, peon, peasant, idiot farmer. Agree with me. That's how they define empathy, but that's not actually what empathy is.
Arts at the secondary
I know, right?
level. The second point I want to say is this. I did a year at as a visiting professor at Wesleyan University.
Ooh, Wesleyan.
Right around the time that the Black Lives Matter movement was really getting off the ground. In 2015, there was a young man, happened to be white, veteran, who was attending Wesleyan University. He fancied himself as a sort of journalist for Fox in training. And he wrote a series of columns attacking the Black Lives Matter movement on campus, and he essentially said they are an anti-police, anti-white group of hate, which of course sparked a major issue. Young Black activists on the campus found him downtown and cornered him. Now, they didn't attack him, but they intimidated him. And then he came back, wrote another column about how he was intimidated. And of course, the institution seeking to protect his brand came out and made a political choice to support him. The short of it is that there was a moment when the president tried to bring the institution together. And this was after a young woman climbed up the flagpole in Charleston to bring down the Confederate flag. Some of you all may remember that. On that stage, I sat with other speakers, and I said that it's not that the young man should be denied the right to assert his view, but that if he is going to use the vehicle of the student newspaper, then his view can be critical, but it should be informed. how do you write an uninformed view when you have access to all of these books and all of these professors on an institution of higher learning? How do you do that? How do you not know that the history of race-based predatory policing is rooted in the transatlantic slave system, that it is grounded in colonial rule, and that it's not something that is unique to the United States, but it's a global dynamic? How do you not know that? And then a teachable moment came. I extended an invitation to him to come and see me. And he came to my office. And he was ready to do battle, right? The ex-soldier. And then I started to say to him, tell me where'd you serve? And he is all defensive, telling me where he served. Then I said, I trained soldiers like you. Excuse me? Yes, I'm a former drill sergeant. I'm a former criminal investigator with the state police. His whole posture started to change. A Black man who was this Africana studies professor was actually a part of my crew. He was in the military. And he was not just a criminal investigator with the state police, but he was also a police instructor. I extended him an invitation to take a course with me. He did. In December of 2016, December of 2015, NPR contacted him to say, tell me, how are things going on campus since you talked about being accosted? He said, I have a different view. What accounts for that? I took a course with Dr. Harris. There's always a teachable moment, particularly with our young people. But let's be clear, we are fighting an uphill battle because of the structural foundations of secondary education and the way that neoliberalism defines space and access to resources in the academy.
What did you just hear in that last part that he just said? This is why we watch Happy Hour. For those who are new, what just happened is why we watch Happy Hour, is why we watch it from start to finish. Because he just said something very important that I want everyone to understand, but I'm testing people. I know it's almost 8 o'clock. And some of you are drinking wine. I'm drinking this like a 10% beer, man. I'm testing people to see if you were paying attention. These are the moments that give away the game. These are the moments that give away what they're doing. This is why we watch it from start to finish. He was talking about how neoliberalism has taken over education. Neoliberalism has not taken over education. That's wrong. It's not neoliberalism. But why this gives away the game, and we will replay it in a second, why this gives away the game is he is telling us that what's going on in the schools isn't going far enough. Tom J says he's incapable of having an opinion or telling a story without mentioning race. These people call me Uncle Tom. And for those who don't know, Tom J is Black. He is. And yet he disagrees with this guy. You must have ascended to whiteness, Tom J. Let's rewind just a little bit and listen to this again. And I want you guys to really listen to it, okay? Because these are the moments that we need to listen for. Listen, the stuff you see on Libs of TikTok, I'm not shit-talking it. It's fine. I'm glad that Libs of TikTok is doing what she's doing. But those are the things that are outlandish. The people that do Libs of TikTok stuff are not really usually in charge of things. You need to listen for the quieter moments where they give away the game. The quieter moments where they say something almost in passing. Most people didn't even catch it. Neoliberalism has taken over education. No, it hasn't. And this tells us that he thinks things haven't gone far enough. Let's listen again.
December of 2015, NPR contacted him to say, tell me, how are things going on campus since you talked about being accosted? He said, I have a different view. What accounts for that? I took a course with Dr. Harris. There's always a teachable moment, particularly with our young people. But let's be clear, we are fighting an uphill battle because of the structural foundations of secondary education and the way that neoliberalism defines space and access to resources in the academy.
He thinks
Thank you, Dr.
neoliberalism
Harris.
is an
I'm gonna
uphill
read
battle.
a comment from Facebook. Says, I think, this is from Denise Navarro. She says, I think we need to keep the focus on accountability, foster discussion of what accountability means, and don't get it dismissed as cancel culture. I think there's some wisdom in there. We had a question from Nolan who said his TV is too loud. But his roommate's TV is too loud, I should say. He's wondering, this is actually for Dr. Perry, where do you see an urban-rural dynamics and tensions are at play more broadly?
Thank you for your question. I think it's an interesting one, and I think, as I mentioned in my talk, America is a particularly large country, both in terms of population and geography, and people's socialization process has a big impact in terms of how they make sense of reality, including political realities. And so I think we see, particularly in this hyper-partisan era, a growing divide between people's experiences, understanding of society, and politics, depending on whether they're predominantly living in an urban, suburban, or rural environment. And there's no real easy way to increase understanding across those different community types. But I think trying to find relationships, teachable moments, as Dr. Harris put so well, being curious in terms of encountering people who are different from you, whether that's socially, whether that's in school, whether that's in the workplace. It's so tempting when we get confronted with a view that we find very hard to accept, to begin telling people why they're wrong, rather than taking a moment and asking, why do you think that? How did you get to that view? So I think those are some of the types of things I try to think about in bridging those divides.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry about that. I don't know if anybody else has anything else they would like to say. Oh, Laura Kleppinger, Dr. Kleppinger.
Got about 20 more minutes, guys. Sit tight. We're almost there.
About the empathy question and how we can teach empathy. I teach anthropology, as most of you know.
You can't teach
empathy. In many ways, it's what I strive to do in teaching about, the discipline of anthropology. I like that the way this conversation was going. I was thinking about Seth Holmes, who's a medical anthropologist, at the end of his book, Fresh Fruit, Broken Bodies. He says something about like how to solve all the problems that he's presented in this book. It's about migrant farm workers, and basically his answer is do more anthropology. So I feel like some of the conversation here today goes with that argument that I usually like to end my class with. But when I teach intro, I actually put the words that you open with, Dave, Dr. Whitner, on the screen. This idea as a founding concept of the United States that all men are created equal. And when you were talking in your presentation, in your opening remarks, you said all men are not created equal. And I just took a little note because I always kind of teach that line as an aspirational one, right? Because the next lines are endowed by their creator with, right, these inalienable rights. And so it's not saying that all people are equal or exist in equal terms, but that they should. And that's kind of my starting place where, and so I guess I'd like to know if I'm teaching that wrong from the political scholars, because I think it gives us a place to start from, or to appeal to people across differences, right? Is that, that founding myth is is we have to hearken with the reality that it hasn't been the case, right, throughout our history. But by understanding people across beliefs or across different experiences, we can work toward that, you know, aspirational founding mythology. So tell me if I'm doing it wrong.
I wouldn't say you're doing it wrong at all. It's definitely aspirational. And in the context of the Declaration, in this, you know, grand sort of 2-paragraph preamble where we're laying out, I mean, liberal philosophy saying it's not kings that'll rule, but it's people, and it's people choosing a government for themselves, that this equality is a moral equality. It has to be. So it has to be a sort of moral, and we can kind of get that even as, you know, those words were themselves written by a slaveholder. So like we've got big problems right off the start. But wrestling with that becomes then part of this story. And, you know, as someone who also teaches human rights, like one of the things that we have to get across to students is like the essence of human rights is everyone is of equal moral worth. Everyone has dignity. Everyone deserves to be treated fairly and the same. And the same can mean different things in different contexts. And it's one of those things like students are like, so like, wait, what about Hitler? Like, well, yeah, him too. Like, so Hitler has human rights? Yeah, Hitler's got human rights. But like, what about, and you can, you know, go through any list of people. And that's kind of what we're saying is like, that's the way it should
Except
be.
you're not
And
saying that
I
for
think what
people
we've
you
heard from
politically
all the talks that
disagree
have been
with.
today is
Yes,
we
Cindy,
haven't
I
been
agree
good
with you.
about that ever. But as I think Dr. Harris pointed out earlier, and Dr. Cash definitely, you know, hit on some of
I
this
have
as well,
ascended to full anarchism in 2
this
years.
sort of recurring
3
theme
years, I
throughout
guess.
American history is we're
3
really
years.
good at calling out that we're not good at it.
I really do wonder, this is just a side note, because I had a phone call with you guys know Dennis. A lot of you know Dennis Pratt. Dennis is like the #1 libertarian in New Hampshire. He is the guiding light. He is the ethicist. He is the organizer of PorcFest. He is the man from which we are kept in line and taught how to perceive these concepts. And Dennis called me like last week, and he was telling me, he was like, sweetheart, because he always calls me sweetheart. He was like, sweetheart, you came along so much quicker. You came along so much quicker than these other people. And I don't think that was like necessarily like a pat on the back or anything, other than like, I'm immersed in this all day, every day. And so Dennis was basically saying that I got to anarchism like years ahead of schedule for what it takes most people to get to anarchism. And so I say that, and Kurt's saying full anarchism is a recognition of fact, reason, and not being a hypocrite. I like, how long does it take people from like the time they start to question things to get to full it? Because like I'm starting to become comfortable calling myself an ANCAP. I'm getting there. It's a cool name, I have to be honest. But I'm like, I don't trust any of these people. I think we would be better off. I would like this Speaker of the House thing to go on forever. As much as I would like the Republicans to have like subpoena power and all that stuff, like, can we just do this Speaker of the House battle for 2 years? I think that would be fucking great. I think the world would be a better place if the entire federal government burned down overnight. I'm not saying that as a threat, FBI. I'm not doing anything. I'm staying in New Hampshire. I'm not setting the fire. I'm just saying that if someone else set the fire and it happened to burn down the government overnight, I wouldn't be involved in it. I would never do that. I'm just saying I wouldn't be upset if it happened. So I'm learning. But I do wonder how long it takes normal people to get there. Anyway, let's wrap up, guys. Mount that like button if you haven't already. This is Happy Hour.
Usually in these sort of like punctuated moments, like it's it's not an accident that, the Seneca Falls Declaration, the Declaration of Sentiments, models itself after the Declaration of Independence. It's not an accident that
No, I've
in
never
his
watched
Gettysburg
Eric
Address,
July.
Lincoln
I've
reminds
never
us of
watched
the
him.
Declaration. It's not an accident that about 100 years after that,
You
with
just
the March on
enjoy the
Washington,
fire. You
that
put your
King is
hands up
telling
to
us
the
we
heat. You're like,
made
man, I'm gonna
all
roast
of
a
these
s'more.
promises and they still haven't been delivered, because there's a lot of rhetorical power in those promises and in those goals and in those aspirations. And I mean, we heard echoes of it in, if you want to look at Amanda Gorman's poem that she gave at Biden's inauguration, which is phenomenal. And if you somehow have made it this far without hearing it, you absolutely should go watch it when you're done. But she talks about this sort of work in progress. And I think that is the right way to read it, even if it were some sort of assertion at the time of, we're equal, we're free, get out of our way, please, because there's, a pretty big, please don't fight us. I mean, we knew it was happening. But yeah, I think that is the sort of right way to think about it for what that's worth.
If I may jump in here quickly, I absolutely agree with that discussion. I would just add to that too, something that becomes problematic then is an embracing of the Declaration to an extent that leads to a perspective of color blindness, right? And so along with that, then we have to get into, and part of teaching, right? We have to get into the institutions that have created and recreate every day disequity.
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 I've never heard that term before.
Many different ways. So
no, she said up
I
to
think,
color blindness. She doesn't want color
hurdle,
blindness.
Is to get to that level of understanding. And I guess this is where, Dr. Kleppinger and I have continued a little bit of our conversation from a few sessions ago in terms of the place of love. I guess that's where empathy has to come together with also, an embracing of complicated realities. And that, if we adhere to the words, if we adhere to Jefferson's words, we try to do that every day, it's just not enough. But I guess that also speaks to what several of my colleagues are setting out about teachable moments and about patience and also
it's all
trying
good, Gator.
to
We're cool. We're cool, Aaron. Don't worry about
the
it.
student who may be a formal
Cheers.
student or might be someone who, you're trying to enlighten. I don't mean that in a
It does,
demeaning
doesn't
way,
it?
sort of professor student, or not that is to me, it is not in any sort of hierarchical way. Yeah, so I think we have to think about all that too.
If I might build on that, that ties the whole question of empathy together, and I'm looking at what Shelby raised, what Dr. Kleppinger has said, Dr. Perry, and Dr. Taglerini, and Dr. Cash. I'm reminded of something that Dr. King said. He said that the arc of justice bends slowly, but it does bend, right? It does eventually bend. And it goes back to the point that Dr. Whitner said, reminded us on staying focused on accountability. The Lone Black freedom struggle is about accountability. It's about accountability to an idea of what it means to be a human being. From the moment that Black-skinned Africans were abducted during the transatlantic slave system, they resisted. They continued to resist in new forms of oppression through the ways in which they adapted different types of languages, different types of responses to oppression. The fact that they escaped, all of this was designed to create and not be a human being and who did not. And even though they did not have the power, the fact that they resisted caused the political discussion to change. It caused the media to begin to reflect their actions. That ultimately is how we as scholars can look back at that moment. If their actions had not, we would not be able to really talk about it right now. And that's really very important to see, as I stated earlier, that we should not solely understand accountability within the context of institutional responses. Accountability has its birth in a much more organic process. And the one thing that we can do in this country.
What I want all of you taking away from this, and what the most important lesson that we have learned from Clemmy today as we enter the last 10 minutes of this roundtable, and thank you to everyone who's hung in. The most important lesson that we've learned from Clemmy is that if you say things with confidence and you slow down and you enunciate your speech and you take up space in the conversation, you command the attention. And I might be not mocking HG Tutor, not mocking, because I would never do that. If there's one thing you don't do, it's mock narcissistic psychopaths on the internet. But if I were to demonstrate, based on what Clemmy has taught us here today, it's that if you slow down and enunciate, and you present as though you are the smartest asshole in the room, they will let you talk for as long as you want, and you will convince people through sheer confidence, even if you're making it all up, even if what you're saying has no basis in reality at all. Exactly, Stevie. Maybe I should just slow down in all my videos and talk like this. Because if I talk with this air of superiority, with just a slight accent, then I will command the attention of the room, even if I don't say anything of substance. Oh! I succeeded. I did my job. I did my job.
Is raise our voice. We can, young folk who we have the responsibility to
Why
shape
would you
their
break up
intellectual
with me like that, Tom
of
J?
the power that exists in their voice, the power that exists in their pen. The fact that Donald Trump was not held accountable by the Senate, as I stated and as Dr. Taclarinia has stated, is not the end all. In many respects, it may just well be the beginning. And I think that
there you go, Gator.
really should see that at the core of this is the ability of people to become agents of change. And to become agents of change, we have to reconceptualize what accountability means and empower those who we teach and those who we engage in the broader civic sphere to understand that at its core, we, the average individual, has the power to hold the idea of democracy and freedom and the country that put forward these ideas. We have the ability of holding the country accountable, because that's what Dr. King talked about, and Dr. Tagliarino was absolutely correct. The March on Washington, I think it was either Dr. Tagliarino or Dr. Cash, was absolutely correct. The March on Washington was about saying, hey, we got this check. It's much more like a promissory note. If we drop it, it's going to bounce, right? It's going to bounce because we come here to cash it and we don't know if there's money in the bank. And interestingly enough, that's exactly what Black Lives Matter activists are saying. That's what Me Too activists are saying. That's what the LGBTQ activists are saying, right? So there is a moment here when we can really define what it means to be accountable and empower our young folks to change the political conversation by redefining accountability and then looking to build a movement on those redefinitions.
I think Santia had a question he
Oh,
wanted to
Peter
ask.
got the good salad emoji.
I wanted to ask
The
Dr.
toss
Harris
salad
a question
emotion.
because I never got to. My parents always taught me to appreciate African American history as they open doors and opportunities to other minorities. What can other minorities do to help the movement, or if you have any other suggestions?
Why, thank you,
Thank you,
Brooklyn.
Cynthia, for
Thank you
that question.
for your admiration.
I think that one of the best things that all historically marginalized groups can do is twofold. One is to exercise self-determination and building strong communities, strong platforms, strong institutions. And then once you have the ability to do that, to then move forward and engage in alliances, building political alliances that will ultimately seek to improve the conditions that historically marginalized people face. Now, this is something that Malcolm X was
you should
initially
always hear
against,
people talking
in the post-war
in
period,
my narcissist
when
voice.
he was asked
It's
during
so much
his
nicer
recent
than my
departure
influencer
from the nation.
voice. Don't you know?
Do you see a position where liberal whites could be helped? I believe no. But upon returning from the Hajj, where he saw this international community of Muslims who were as opaque in their complexion as those in the Sudan, and as white in their complexion as any white person you would see, but adhering to the principles of the Quran and in a type of interracial way that frankly he had never seen before. He returns from the Hajj with a renewed sense of how to move forward. And it is all about developing a strong base, and then from that base, developing strong
Carrie is
alliances.
beneath me. She can say whatever she
And when
likes.
asked the
She
question,
is beneath
do
me.
you intend on pushing
I mean, really, why would I
this
even
thing
bother
forward
myself
and
with what she
pressing for
thinks?
civil rights? He said no. I am looking to move this to the International Criminal Court, because what's happening in the United States is a question of human rights. It is not just something that's happening in the United States, it's happening with global communities of color. Why? Because colonialism, Cynthia, created the modern world. And the same repressive issues that we are talking about in this country were used to subordinate global communities of color all over the world. We are truly
Who
talking
thinks
about a
Clemmy is a
global issue
Marxist?
right now, and we should never lose sight of that. And so your question is
He
extremely important.
bleeds
There is an
Marxist to
opportunity here
me.
to not only address concerns that are important to the
Oozes
African-American community and the
Marxist.
African diaspora at large, but to also see an
Yes,
opportunity to build alliances with other global communities
indeed.
and, quite frankly, other marginalized people who were not a part of the founding fathers' conceptualization when
I
it
do
came to
too.
empowering them, right? Again, I go back to the realization, half of the world's population are women,
Yes.
right? If we cannot talk about
He's gonna
empowering
protect
women,
us
everything that we're
fragile
talking about
women,
is
Sin.
meaningless. I hate to be reductionist, but I feel quite correct in that point. I hope I addressed your question.
I
Yep,
feel quite
thank you.
correct in my
Thank you. I'm
assessment,
going to read one
Clemmy.
last statement from Ryan. And I think we've probably come pretty close to the end of our discussion, at least time-wise.
Oh, thank God.
Ryan says, I'm not sure who said this earlier, but someone offhandedly mentioned the teaching of candid history. Teaching history how it actually happened is something that I personally think is extremely important,
But
especially at the early levels in primary school. What I immediately think of is Christopher Columbus. We as students didn't find out until so much later that he really did some heinous things. I mean, we had a day off from school for him, so he must be good,
hang
right?
on. Pause. Naruto. How did they do that? How in the world would an entire country, a progressive country, I'm told, how on earth would they legalize the most gravest of all sexual proclivities? I'm going to do all videos in this voice from now on, just to see what happens. Just to see. There'll be no more yelling. Or no more talking. Okay. All videos from now on will be in this voice with this present. No, Jettifier, no. We don't have rage. We have vengeance. Vengeance is slower. Vengeance takes time. It takes time to percolate. Rage. Rage is for the lesser narcissist. We enjoy the process of getting to where we want to go. I don't know what you're talking about, Sid. I think this is an amazing idea. Tom J, don't pedos make the laws? Well, that would make it easier, wouldn't it, Tom J? Wouldn't it that make it easier? All right. Oh, yes, they're going to clip this out and probably tag HG Tutor in it by the end of the day, and they're going to say, Carlin is mocking you, HG. This is proof that she is the real narcissist and not Carrie, who is perfect in every possible way. That's probably true, Kara. They will love my narcissist voice. Let's wrap up 2 more minutes.
And I think that's a really great point to end on. We got a lot of work to do.
Well, thank God.
In all fields.
Thank God for that.
And I really appreciate the time and effort everyone has spent on this. The audience too. You guys have been fantastic. We've literally reached thousands of people with this series.
Clemmy with
Hundreds
the
of people every
quiet
night have
clap.
been on between, participating and listening and taking this in between Facebook and Zoom. So the reach and I think the impact of these talks is far greater than probably any of us realize.
Yes.
So I'd like to
It
thank everyone,
is
all
far
the
greater. You've
panelists,
provided us with
and
an
our audience and
excellent
participants as
happy
well.
hour.
So thank you.
Round of applause.
And since
For
I've got the
me,
floor, I'd like
not
to
for them.
let everybody know that next week on the 23rd for Black History Month, that Dr. Harris will be giving us a talk, going a little bit different direction, I think, but it is titled, "What accounts for the
Well,
peculiar
Tom J,
relationship
that
between the
explains
African-American community
everything.
and the American medical
It
profession?
does.
A brief history of race and racism in public health and medicine," which is frankly an incredibly timely subject given the pandemic and already the recognition of how race.
I think we've made it to the end of another happy hour, and I have adopted an alternate persona for the remainder of the day. For no good reason. It obviously has nothing to do with the alcohol that I have consumed in the course of this stream. But I hope you enjoyed happy hour. It is a weekly tradition on this channel at 5 p.m. on Fridays where things might get a little silly. They might get a little theatrical. Because when you watch the woke progressive left, sometimes you need to embrace your inner narcissist. I will see all of you tomorrow for Socialism Saturday around 6 p.m. Eastern Time, of course, where we will watch the lowly, the unbathed, the real socialists on this channel. And we'll look down upon them, knowing that they are our lessers. And we will enjoy every moment of mocking their insanity. I'm Karlin Borisenko. Mount that like button on the way out the door. And we'll see you tomorrow, comrades.